Chapter 2394. Qian Yu and Black Dragon both fantasized that Ji Tianxing would take them to the treasury to choose a divine artifact. Or would he enter a secret realm to receive a majestic power inheritance or practice some kind of divine technique? A moment later, when the two followed Ji Tianxing to the 6th floor of the tower, their hopes were dashed. Flying in the endless darkness, Black Dragon looked around gloomily and did not say a word. Qian Yu was disappointed and couldn't help but ask, "Old Ji, where are you taking us? Where are our rewards? Is this the place that will benefit us so much? You're not playing with us again, are you?" Ji Tianxing glanced at it and couldn't help but chuckle. "You two are so shallow. Cultivation methods, divine artifacts, and treasures are all worldly possessions. Only when one's own strength was powerful could one truly benefit endlessly. Since you're so stupid, I'll be frank. This is a distorted space where the flow of time is 50 times faster than the outside world. If you cultivate here for 50 years, only 1 year will pass in the outside world. Do you understand?" Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were stunned for a moment. Then, their eyes lit up as they were filled with shock. Heavens! Time is 50 times faster? If we cultivate here for 500 years, only 10 years will pass in the outside world? Time is the most mysterious power. This space can distort time and space. It's unbelievable. Hee. Then won't we become the youngest and most heaven-defying divine beasts in the world? Qian Yu and Black Dragon immediately understood the powerful effect of this space. They also knew that divine beasts were different from humans. Divine beasts grew very slowly and needed a very long time. For example, the dragon race with a low bloodline cultivated for 1,000 years to become a flood dragon and 10,000 years to become a true dragon and step into the immortal state. If the dragon race was like this, then there were all kinds of demon beasts and spirit beasts in the world. Only 1 in 10,000 could cultivate to the immortal state. Qian Yu and Black Dragon's bloodline was extraordinary. Their aptitude and comprehension were superb. But even so, they needed to cultivate for at least a few hundred years before they could break through to the immortal state. If they cultivated step by step and reached the immortal state in a few hundred years, Ji Tianxing would have already ascended to the immortal realm and even become a divine king again. At that time, the two of them would become dispensable. This distorted space-time could solve this problem. Black Dragon looked at Ji Tianxing with shining eyes and said gratefully, "Old Ji, thank you so much. Don't worry, we'll definitely work hard to cultivate here and strive to break through to the deity realm as soon as possible." Qian Yu also looked at Ji Tianxing with a grateful expression. "Old Ji, we misunderstood you just now. Please don't take it to heart. Only now do I understand how much effort you've put into this. You've spared no effort to help us grow. We will definitely work hard and not disappoint you. However, cultivating in seclusion for a long period of time will consume a lot of resources. Shouldn't you prepare some for us?" Ji Tianxing immediately rolled his eyes and said snappily, "Don't think too highly of yourself. This distorted space-time is not specially prepared for you. Yao Yao, Ke Bailong, and Lan Kuan are all cultivating here. You two stay quiet and don't disturb them." After that, he took out 2 space rings and gave them to Qian Yu and Black Dragon. These 2 space rings contain the cultivation resources you need for your cultivation. There are also 2 secret arts that are most suitable for you to cultivate. From now on, you'll stay here and cultivate. When you reach the deity realm, you can leave. After saying these 2 words, Ji Tianxing turned and left. Qian Yu and Black Dragon held the space rings and watched his figure disappear into the darkness. Their eyes became firm. After a moment of silence, Black Dragon said in a low, muffled voice, "Actually, Old Ji has already thought about it and arranged everything for us." Qian Yu rolled his eyes and looked at Black Dragon with a smile. "Silly dragon, did you hear that just now? Yao Yao is also cultivating in seclusion here." "What do you mean?" Black Dragon looked at him with a puzzled face. Qian Yu blinked at it and smiled mysteriously. She said in a strange tone, "Have you forgotten? Yao Yao's mount is called Lu Li. She's your future wife. Uh. Black Dragon froze for a moment and lowered his head awkwardly. Don't talk nonsense. What future wife? There's no such thing. Seeing Black Dragon's reaction, Qianyu smiled even more mockingly and said, if you're not a silly dragon, you'll have to fight for this kind of thing. If you don't take the initiative to get close to Lu Li, she won't remember you. Don't just stand there. Go find Yao Yao and get in touch with Lu Li. Black Dragon shook his head and said in a low voice, I'm not familiar with Lu Li. We haven't seen each other for a few years. She probably doesn't remember me. Qianyu smiled and said, the first time you're unfamiliar, the second time you're familiar. Do you want me to go with you and give you some courage? Black Dragon hesitated, not knowing how to choose. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's majestic voice suddenly sounded in their minds. Why, I said just now, did you two ignore it? Do you still want to talk about love at this time? Qianyu and Black Dragon trembled and quickly put away their distracting thoughts and found a place to cultivate. At the same time, in the darkness 10,000 miles away, Ji Tianxing also took out a divine cauldron and prepared to upgrade the Sword of Burial of Heaven. It was an ancient bronze cauldron. Its shape was simple and clumsy. It was square in shape and had distinct edges. The ancient cauldron had 3 legs for corners and 8 handles. There were countless array patterns carved on the cauldron and 2 ancient black characters. 9 heavens. Without a doubt, this was the 9 heavens cauldron in the Divine Weapon Pavilion. This was a genuine divine weapon and not a divine weapon from the divine martial continent. Therefore, Ji Tianxing rarely used this cauldron. Even now, with his strength, he could barely control it and could not release the true power of the 9 heavens cauldron. Although I haven't recovered to the divine realm, it shouldn't be a problem for me to control the 9 heavens cauldron to refine weapons. Ji Tianxing stood in the darkness and looked at the 9 heavens cauldron seriously. He slowly raised his palms and started to cast a spell. Swish, 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 swish. He waved his palms and shot out thousands of rays of magic power into the divine cauldron. Soon, the array of the divine cauldron was activated and the entire cauldron lit up with golden light. Wong. The golden light flickered for a moment and the 9 heavens cauldron expanded 100 times. It was as tall and majestic as a mountain. The array patterns on the cauldron lit up as well. Dense energy flowed and exuded a sacred and unparalleled aura. After half a month, Ji Tianxing only activated 3 arrays. Golden divine flames lit up in the 9 heavens cauldron. The temperature rose rapidly and reached a terrifying level. Ji Tianxing continued to cast the spell for a month. When the divine flames in the cauldron reached the maximum, he took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and placed it in. Chapter 2395. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was only a divine artifact. In order to restore it to a divine artifact, it had to be tempered over a long period of time. Not only did it have to remove the impurities, but it also had to fuse with many divine artifact materials and restructure its internal structure and array. Of course, the Sword World and the Yang Tomb were not affected. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged in the air with his eyes closed and a solemn expression on his face. His hands were constantly forming seals. Colorful seals fell into the 9 heavens cauldron like snowflakes. Under his control, the 9 heavens cauldron glowed with golden light and blazed with divine flames, quickly refining the Sword of Burial of Heaven and many other materials. Time passed silently. Soon, the 9 heavens cauldron's power could not be replenished in time and began to weaken. Ji Tianxing had to take out a large number of spirit stones and throw them into the cauldron. The cauldron's power quickly recovered and continued to refine the Sword of Burial of Heaven and other materials. Unknowingly, 2 years passed. The Sword of Burial of Heaven had long been refined into a crimson iron rod with all its impurities removed. The star crystal core and the black metal strips were also melted into silver and black liquid. Under Ji Tianxing's control, the 2 colored liquids began to fuse with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. This process was very slow and could not afford the slightest mistake. After a full 4 years, the two materials were finally truly fused with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. At this time, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had shrunk to a length of 300 meters and was silver and black. The divine sword embryo had been refined. Next, he needed to add many supplementary materials and add a divine array. Ji Tianxing had been continuously casting spells for 6 years. He was already exhausted, and his mind was exhausted to the extreme. Even his dermic power had been depleted hundreds of times and could only rely on cultivation resources to recover. The Nine Heavens Cauldron's operation also required a large number of spirit stones and resources. As a result, the cultivation resources stored in his spatial ring were decreasing at an extremely fast rate. However, the divine sword was only half reforged. No matter how tired he was, he had to grit his teeth and persevere. Ji Tianxing had been refining in the divine tower for 6 years, but only a month and a half had passed in the Five Elements world. At the same time, Tianju Mountain, in the ruins of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, inside the Palace of Heaven Punishing, and Yu, who was clad in golden armor, was sitting on the throne in the meeting hall. In the spacious and bright hall stood 18 captains in silver armor. The atmosphere in the hall was solemn and dignified. Everyone looked at Yu with burning eyes, their eyes full of anticipation. And Yu looked around and said in a dignified tone, "Everyone, it has been 4 months since we successfully occupied the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. In the past 4 months, we have firmly controlled the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. We have already turned these 2 regions into our territory. We've recruited hundreds of millions of slaves and are constantly excavating and plundering resources. Currently, our treasury is very full. After 4 months of recuperation, the strength of our soldiers has also increased, and they have recovered to their peak condition. I believe that everyone is well prepared and can't wait to launch a bigger war and invade a wider territory." The 18 silver-armored captains all smiled knowingly and nodded in agreement. Deputy General is right. The sabers of the soldiers have been thirsting for blood for a long time. Our race lives to kill and conquer. Without war and slaughter, what's the point of living? What does a mere 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains amount to? It's just a small place, and it's not enough for us to live in. That's right. Our goal is the entire Shenwu continent, and even the entire Five Elements realm. No, you're all too shallow. Our journey is the Sea of Stars. Many of the captains were discussing excitedly. After a few months of interaction, everyone was even more convinced of Inyu's abilities. Originally, some of the captains had held grudges and jealousy against Inyu, but now, those feelings were gradually dispelled. Everyone had to admit that Inyu's talent was greater than theirs. It was no wonder that General Long Fu had placed him in such an important position. After everyone discussed for a while, Inyu waved his hand to signal for everyone to quiet down. He nodded slightly and said in a solemn tone, "Everyone is right. Only war and slaughter can make our race stronger and live more meaningfully. Our next target is the damned Luo Shui Divine Kingdom." However, General Long Fu sent a message to me earlier to discuss the next step of the plan. Although our soldiers are the strongest of the strongest, the elites of the elites, our numbers are too small. But we are too few in number to do everything by ourselves. Luo Shui and Ji Tianxing assassinated a batch of them, and now we only have 38 captains and 4,200 soldiers left. Among them, there are more than 10 captains and 2,000 soldiers, and they still have to guard our territory. Thus, only 20 captains and 2,000 soldiers can be dispatched to the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. Hearing Inyu's words, the dozen or so captains quieted down and frowned worriedly. That's right. Our lack of numbers is our greatest weakness. We are unpolished jade, and the natives of Shenwu continent are lowly clay tiles. How can we fight them? Deputy General, and since you've discussed this with General Long Fu, you must have a countermeasure, right? A few of the captains began to discuss, and someone asked. And you nodded and revealed a confident smile. That's right. The countermeasure is simple, and we've always done the same when we've been conquering the heavens. That is, to subdue another with another. Gather the 72 cities and the Pillar of Heaven's army and attack the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Our soldiers are all strong, and each of them can take charge of an area on their own. Even a single soldier has the strength of a martial sage, which is comparable to the Luo Shui divine kingdom's commander and emperor. Everyone had a sudden realization, and they all revealed knowing smiles. One of the captains hurriedly suggested, "Why do we have to go through so much trouble? Haven't we already gathered hundreds of millions of slaves? Gather those slaves and let our soldiers lead them, and we can immediately attack the Luo Shui divine kingdom." And he nodded and smiled. Of course, this method is feasible, but it's not accurate enough. The slaves help us plunder resources, and this plan cannot be stopped. We cannot send all the slaves to participate in the war. Thus, we have to select the strongest 10 million from the hundreds of millions of slaves to form an army. Under the leadership of our soldiers, the 10 million soldiers will be invincible, and we will take down the Luo Shui divine kingdom in the shortest time possible. When the captains heard this, their blood began to boil, and an intense fighting spirit burst forth from their bodies. This plan is brilliant. That's great. We will soon be able to gallop through the Luo Shui divine kingdom's territory and occupy even more territory. The Luo Shui divine kingdom is vast and rich in resources. We will definitely be able to strengthen our forces. Seeing the excitement in the crowd, and Yu stood up and stood up. He waved his hand and ordered in a vigorous voice, "I will give you half a month." Chapter 2396. Currently, the Heaven Punisher's territory was split into three: the 72 cities, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain, and the 5 regions in the south of North Underworld Mountain. And Yu guarded Pillar of Heaven's Mountain, while General Dragon, subduing, guarded the 72 cities. The 5 regions in North Underworld Mountain were almost emptied of resources and did not have much value. Only 10 black-armored warriors were left to guard them. After Yu gave the order, the captains quickly returned to their own territories and selected soldiers from the slaves. At the same time, in each of the 72 cities, slaves were also being selected and soldiers were being recruited. After the news spread, it caused a huge commotion and chaos in the various cities. Billions of people knew that the Heaven Punisher was gathering an army to attack a god nation. The martial artists and commoners who were recruited would definitely become cannon fodder and die on the battlefield. Hence, the slaves and commoners in the various cities rebelled and defected. However, under the brutal suppression of the Heaven Punisher, the chaos was quelled in a few days. In just 10 days, the army was gathered. The 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's Mountain each gathered 5 million soldiers to listen to the orders of the Heaven Punisher. And he was very pleased that the soldiers had completed the mission ahead of time. On the morning of the 12th day, he personally led the army out. He had 18 captains under him, and only 6 were left to guard Pillar of Heaven's Mountain. The other 12 captains each led over 400,000 soldiers. They followed him to the south and headed straight for the border of Luo Shui God Nation. Almost at the same time, General Dragon subduing led 13 captains and 5 million soldiers to the northern border of Luo Shui God Nation. The army set out. Everywhere they passed, mountains and rivers shook, and killing intent filled the air. A destructive disaster was about to befall Luo Shui God Nation. The 15th day, north of Luo Shui God Nation, within the empire of White Frost, Yinxing City. A few days ago, it was still autumn. The ancient trees inside and outside the city were golden, and countless leaves fell from the autumn wind. However, after one night, the temperature plummeted. When the sun rose, the commoners in the city were shocked to see that it was snowing. It was snowing heavily, and the cold wind howled. Yinxing City, which had a radius of 200 miles, became a city covered in snow. It was a scene of extreme coldness. The commoners were so cold that their hands and feet were tied. They hurried to make winter clothes. The soldiers on duty, both inside and outside the city walls, were still wearing unlined clothes and armor. Their bodies were covered in snow and ice, and all of them had shrunken expressions. Such abnormal weather caused the commoners to discuss and make wild guesses. Within the city lord's mansion, the city lord also hurriedly gathered his advisors and generals to urgently discuss military matters. They were not talking about the weather change, but about the 72 cities and the gathering of the army at Tianzhu Mountain. Holy Emperor Baishuang had already issued an imperial edict to remind the cities of the northern frontier to be on guard against the invasion of the heaven-punishing race. Yinxing City was one of the most important nodes and strongholds in the northern defense line. When the Devil Race's army attacked the Luo River God Nation, Yinxing City was breached and destroyed in the flames of war. After the war ended, hundreds of thousands of craftsmen and commoners spent a few months to restore Yinxing City to its original state. After receiving the imperial edict, Yinxing City Lord began to strengthen his vigilance. Not only had the number of soldiers doubled, but many new fortifications had also been built. However, the sudden snowstorm last night made Yinxing City Lord sense danger and murderous intent. He had a bad feeling about this. He was afraid that the army of the Heaven Punishers had arrived. Just as expected, while the mayor of Yinxing City was discussing the military situation with his advisors and generals, an armor messenger guard rushed into the meeting hall with a panicked look on his face. "Report! Urgent report!" The messenger rushed into the hall in the wind and snow. He knelt down and reported, "My lord, 300 miles north of the city, an army of unknown origin has been discovered. They are rushing over." Upon hearing this news, Yinxing City Lord, his advisors, and the general's expressions changed. They all stood up in unison. Yinxing City Lord's face was gloomy. He looked at the sky outside the hall and muttered in a low voice, "It should be them. I didn't expect them to come so quickly." After he finished speaking, he looked at the messenger guard with a burning gaze and asked, "Did the scouts see the banners and numbers of that army clearly?" The messenger replied respectfully, "My lord, they don't have a flag. There is a huge black flying boat in front of the army. As for the number of the army, the scouts estimate that there are about 400,000 of them." Yinxing City Lord's face turned even uglier. He said with a murderous aura, "A huge black flying boat? Then it must be the Heaven Punishers." Immediately passed down the order. All the soldiers rush to the city wall and activate the defensive array to defend against the invaders. Also, prepare the city for war. All the martial artists gather and wait for my orders. A few advisors and 2 generals bowed and said yes. Then, they quickly left to pass down the order. Yinxing City Lord also left the hall and returned to his residence. He put on his golden armor and took out his sword. He gathered his descendants and disciples. Then, he led hundreds of guards and rushed to the north gate to prepare to fight the enemy. Soon, the horn for emergency alert resounded throughout the city. Tens of thousands of soldiers rushed to the city wall with their spears and halberds. The people in the city were also awakened. They quickly put aside the things in front of them and took out their weapons to prepare to fight the enemy. Just as the city was in a state of panic, a muffled rumbling sound came from the sky to the north of the city. The sound shook the sky and was as dull as thunder. It made people's hearts tremble. The mountains outside the city were shaking. The ground within a few hundred miles was also shaking. Everyone knew that it was the sound and movement of the thousands of soldiers and horses advancing. In an instant, the faces of countless people and soldiers turned pale. Their eyes were filled with fear. The loud rumbling sound outside the city quickly approached. The wind and snow became even more violent. Soon, a huge black shadow quickly approached the north gate of Yinxing City. Yinxing's city lord and tens of thousands of soldiers looked up at the sky. They saw that the huge black shadow was a black battleship that was thousands of feet long. It was as huge as a mountain. Its appearance was sharp and fierce. It was mysterious and cold. Invisibly, the battleship released a force that could suppress the heavens and the earth. It enveloped the entire Yinxing City. Instantly, the entire city seemed to be frozen. Everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. It was as if their blood was about to be frozen. Their dermic powers weakened rapidly. Such a change caused all the people and soldiers in the city to be terrified. They trembled with fear. Yanxing's city lord's face turned ugly. He felt hopeless. Is the Heaven Punisher tribe really so powerful? The enemy general has not even shown himself. He only released an invisible force, and he wants to suppress the entire city? How should we fight this battle? Chapter 2397. 100 breaths later, an earth-shattering explosion approached. Crowds of human martial artists appeared on the mountain range 100 miles north of the city. An army numbering in the hundreds of thousands was like a multicolored tide, surging from the mountain range. In the sky, there were more than 100 black-armored, four-hooved foreign race elites. They looked strange, but their bodies were huge. Their auras were terrifyingly powerful. They were the black-armored warriors of the Heaven Punishers. Soon, more than 100 Heaven Punishers led an army of 400,000 and arrived outside the city. They formed a formation on the wasteland. Yanxing's city was in chaos. It was as if a pot had exploded. Whether it was the ordinary citizens or the soldiers guarding the city, they were all intimidated by the army of the Heaven Punishers. They were all terrified. The two sides had not started fighting, but Yanxing City's fighting spirit had already been shaken. The Yanxing City Lord took a deep breath. Cold air entered his lungs and cleared his mind. He stepped into the sky, looking at the battleship in the sky through the five-colored great city protecting Array. He shouted, "Who are you? Tell me your name." "This is Yanxing City. It is under the rule of the Luo Shui divine nation. It is the territory of the White Frost Empire. Anyone who dares to invade will be killed without mercy." The Yanxing City Lord shouted in a deep voice. He held a golden sword in his right hand and pointed it at the thousands of soldiers outside the city. At this moment, his back was as tall as a mountain, and he exuded a domineering aura. The soldiers and commoners in the city calmed down when they saw the Yanxing City Lord's bravery. However, the Heaven Punisher captain in the battleship did not even bother to respond. He did not even show his face. The battleship slowly adjusted its angle and aimed its side at the north gate. Crack, crack, crack. The heavy metal bars on the side of the battleship opened, revealing a row of black cannons. In the next instant, more than 30 dark red light beams shot out of the cannons and rained down on the north gate. Boom, boom, boom. Instantly, an earth-shattering rumble exploded and echoed through the sky. The five-color protective array was as fragile as paper under the attack of the dark red light beams. It instantly collapsed. With the north gate as the center, the city walls, houses, and buildings within a 30-mile radius were all blasted into dust. The loud noise reverberated endlessly, and smoke and dust covered the sky, not dissipating for a long time. The entire Yanxing City started to shake violently. Dense cracks appeared on the ground. Tens of thousands of houses, palaces, and streets were destroyed by the shockwave, collapsing into ruins. Naturally, the thousands of soldiers at the North Gate, including the Lord of Yanxing City and the guards, were all killed. There were also more than 70,000 civilians who had been reduced to ashes under the bombardment. Not even their corpses remained intact. Such an apocalyptic scene frightened all the people in the city. Everyone's fighting spirit, faith, and courage collapsed instantly. In his mind, there was only endless fear and panic. The city was filled with heart-wrenching screams, roars of terror and despair, and cries of panic and helplessness. Nearly 1 million civilians abandoned their homes and fled to the South City Gate. They wanted to leave Yanxing City. At this time, the 400,000 soldiers outside the city rushed into the city and began to intercept and kill. Those who tried to escape from Yanxing City were all mercilessly slaughtered. The defending soldiers who were fighting like trapped beasts were also surrounded and attacked by the army. The various large clans and forces in the city gathered many martial artists to resist, but they were unable to escape and were quickly extinguished. Yanxing City was in complete chaos. There were saber lights and sword shadows everywhere. Cold light shot everywhere, blood splattered, and body parts fell to the ground. Countless corpses piled up like mountains. Warm blood spilled on the snow, melting the ice and flowing like a small stream. This was not a war. This was a one-sided massacre. The 400,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher race were all human martial artists recruited from the 72 cities. They could not bear to kill the civilians of Yanxing City. Their consciences were tortured and tortured. However, their lives were in the hands of the Heaven Punisher race, and they had to follow their orders. In just half an hour, Yanxing City had fallen into enemy hands. After more than 200,000 people died, the civilians and martial artists of Yanxing City gave up resisting and running away. The entire city was surrounded by the army. It was impossible to escape. The chaos of war subsided. The Heaven Punisher race successfully took over the city and set up a new defensive array. More than 1 million civilians were trapped in the city and became the slaves of the Heaven Punisher race. The captain of the army sat in the city lord's residence and used Yanxing City as a temporary camp. After 2 days of rest, the captain led dozens of soldiers and an army of 300,000 to attack a nearby city. A similar scene was playing out in the northern border of the Luo Shui divine nation. In just 2 days, more than 40 cities on the northern border's defense line had fallen. These cities were like Yanxing City. They were strongholds on the northern border's defense line and were used to defend against foreign invasions. Unfortunately, these so-called strongholds could not withstand a single blow from the Heaven Punisher race's army. Half a month passed quickly. On this evening, the setting sun was as red as blood. In the imperial capital of the White Frost Empire, in the majestic and dignified imperial palace, the dignified and elegant Saint Emperor's study, Liu Baishuang, who was dressed in a golden dragon robe with cloud patterns and a golden crown with jade inlaid on her head, was bent over the table and writing rapidly to deal with urgent military matters. On the red sandalwood table in front of her, there were at least 100 memorials and letters piled up into a small mountain. Ever since the Heaven Punisher race had invaded, she had received several hundred memorials and letters every day, and she had to read them as quickly as possible. As a result, she had been sitting at the table for half a month, not leaving the study at all. In this period of time, besides reading memorials, she had also gathered her advisors and advisors to discuss military matters. Half a month of hard work had exhausted her, and her face was filled with worry and lethargy. At this moment, 2 burly middle-aged men in golden armor strode into the study. The 2 of them stood side by side and respectfully bowed to Liu Baishuang. They said in unison, "This general, Xie Wen, Zhonglin, greets Lord Saint Emperor." These 2 golden-armored generals were Xie Wen and Zhonglin. When Ji Tianxing had gone to the northern border to fight against the demon race, he had been stationed at Heavenly Lion Pass for a long time. During that time, Liu Baishuang had sent Xie Wen and Zhonglin to serve as Ji Tianxing's deputies. Ji Tianxing had placed these 2 in important positions and had performed many meritorious deeds with him. After the chaos of the demon race had been quelled, the 2 of them had been rewarded and conferred titles by Liu Baishuang. Hearing their voices, Liu Baishuang put down the memorials and royal brush. She nodded with a dignified expression. "You 2 may rise. Quickly report the situation at the front lines." Xie Wen cupped his hands and said in a heavy tone, "Lord Saint Emperor, the war has already broken out for half a month, and the situation is gradually becoming clearer. The Heaven Punisher race has gathered an army of 10 million soldiers in the 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's mountains." Chapter 2398. The Heaven Punisher had led an army of 10 million and had come aggressively. The White Frost Empire was not the only empire that had been invaded. The Changlong Empire and the Red Sun Empire had also been invaded. After all, these 3 empires were in the northernmost part of the Divine Kingdom. They were closest to the Divine Ruins, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain, the 72 cities, and the North Underworld Mountain. When the demon race had invaded, they had also invaded the 3 empires. That war had brought a great disaster to the 3 empires. Hundreds of millions of people had been killed, and billions of people had lost their homes. Only a year had passed, and the 3 empires had yet to recover. The people had yet to walk out of the heavy suffering. Who would have thought that the Heaven Punisher would invade again and burn the land with the flames of war? In just half a month, more than 200 cities have been lost on the northern battlefront of the three empires. At least 50 million people had died in the war. More than 100 million people had fled their homes. During this time, Lu Baishuang had received countless war reports every day. She had a thorough understanding of the situation in the north of the empire. However, when she heard Xie Wen's report and learned that the situation in the three empires was the same, her heart still skipped a beat. After Xie Wen finished his report, the study fell silent. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. Lu Baishuang frowned and said in a low voice, "The cruel and tyrannical Heaven Punisher is indeed plotting against the entire divine kingdom. Many Heaven Punishers led an army of 10 million to attack the northern border of the divine kingdom. The three empires could not withstand them. They are even more ferocious than the demon race's army." Zhonglin cupped his hands and said in a heavy tone, "Lord Saint Emperor, the three empires have yet to recover from the demon race's chaos, and now they are being invaded by the Heaven Punisher. There are rumors among the people that if the heavens do not protect the Luo Shui divine kingdom, this war will." Lu Baishuang frowned and shouted angrily with cold eyes, "Bastard! The survival of the empire is in front of us. Who dares to spread such disgraceful rumors? We cannot allow those bastards to mislead the people and affect the morale of the army. Once they are discovered, they must be severely punished." Zhonglin quickly bowed and cupped his hands. "Yes, Lord." Xie Wen continued, "Lord Saint Emperor, the front lines are retreating. No one can stop the Heaven Punisher's army. It was said that each Heaven Punishing race's army had 400,000 soldiers, and their commander was a deity realm expert. The battleship's cannons could easily destroy any city. An expert with such strength was definitely not someone that the soldiers could resist. I'm afraid only the Divine Master will be able to fend off the experts of the Heaven Punisher race." Lu Baishuang said solemnly, "The moment the battle started, the deity master received the news. Even if the Divine Master hasn't shown herself yet, she must have her own considerations and plans. You can't criticize her." Furthermore, the Heaven-Destroying Clan's army of 10 million was divided into 25 armies. Each army had a martial god, a battleship, hundreds of martial sage realm warriors in black armor, and 400,000 soldiers. Only the entire Luo Shui divine kingdom would be able to withstand such a powerful attack. This time, I'm afraid the fate of Scandinavia will really be, alas. Speaking to her, she could not help but sigh and reveal a helpless expression. Xie Wen and Zhonglin looked at each other and cupped their fists. At the same time, they said, "Lord Sage Emperor, you have to make plans. The Heaven-Destroying Clan's army is unstoppable. Once they invade half of our country and threaten the imperial capital, you have to retreat." Lu Baishuang looked at the two of them with a solemn gaze and said sternly, "Retreat? Where can we retreat to? The Heaven-Destroying Clan's army's target is the entire Luo Shui divine kingdom. Even if we retreat to the southernmost part of the divine kingdom, we won't be able to escape death. Since this empire of white frost was created by me, I will live and die with it." Xie Wen and Zhonglin were stunned and wanted to persuade her further. However, Lu Baishuang had already made up her mind. She waved her hand and gestured for the two of them to leave. The two of them could only bow and take their leave. Then they rushed back to the northern border and led the army to kill the enemy. As time passed, the situation in the Luo Shui divine kingdom became more and more dangerous. The Heaven-Destroying Clan continued to move southward. They conquered dozens of cities every day and continued to expand their territory. Wherever the army went, not a single city could stop them. With a battleship at the front, they only needed to fire once to break through the city's defenses. Then hundreds of black-armored soldiers led the 400,000-strong army into the city and quickly took over the entire city. It only took 6 hours for a main city that could hold 2 million people to fall from the moment it was attacked. In the beginning, when the cities were invaded, the city lords and the soldiers defending the cities would fight with all their might. The commoners in the cities were united against a common enemy and fought back without fear of death. However, when the heaven-destroying clan's army used ruthless methods to quickly kill hundreds of thousands of people, the entire city collapsed. Later on, the heaven-destroying clan took over more and more cities, and the related news spread throughout the Luo Shui divine kingdom. When the soldiers and commoners of the various cities learned of the heaven-destroying clan's terrifying strength and methods, they lost their fighting spirit and will to fight. After all, resisting and fighting back would only lead to death. If they obediently admitted defeat and surrendered, they could still keep their lives. The cultivators and commoners who were unwilling to surrender and become slaves of the heaven-destroying clan had fled before the heaven-destroying clan's army arrived. For a time, a large number of refugees appeared in the Luo Shui divine kingdom, and they all fled toward the south. The total number of refugees in the three empires reached hundreds of millions, and they rushed toward the south like a flood. Under such circumstances, the entire Luo Shui divine kingdom was in a state of panic. Wherever the heaven-destroying clan's army went, the cities opened their gates and surrendered, allowing the heaven-destroying clan to invade. As such, the only thing that could restrict the heaven-destroying clan's expansion was the speed at which they took over a city. Unknowingly, a month passed. Half of the White Frost, Scarlet Sun, and Changlong empires had fallen. At this rate, the three empires would be completely conquered in half a month. That evening, the imperial capital of the White Frost Empire, Lu Baishuang, who wore a white dress and a white jade phoenix crown, stood at the peak of the imperial palace. She faced the biting cold northern wind and looked down at the capital city with an indifferent expression. The sky was dark, and a blood-red sun hung on the horizon, appearing and disappearing through the thick clouds. The once dazzling and prosperous imperial capital had now become desolate, with fallen leaves and snow all over the city. The heaven-destroying clan's army had charged into the wastelands north of the city last night. As such, more than half of the 3 million commoners in the imperial capital had evacuated a few days ago. Currently, only 500,000 commoners were left in the imperial capital. These commoners were old, weak, sick, and disabled. Even if they fled, they would die on the road. They could not leave their homeland and would rather die with the imperial capital. Chapter 2399. Once the flames of war spread, the city became desolate. 600 years of homeland, millions of miles of mountains and rivers. The Phoenix Pavilion and the Dragon Pavilion connected to the heavens, jade trees and jade branches like smoke. How could they have known more? Lu Baishuang stood at the peak of the imperial palace, facing the biting cold north wind as she muttered in a lonely voice. The cold wind was like a knife, blowing up her white dress and her fine black hair to flutter in the wind. Her slender and weak body was like a sharp sword that stood between the heavens and the earth. No matter how the dark clouds from the north rolled over, she did not yield. She was not afraid of war or death. She was sad because the Heaven Punisher race was powerful and the Luo Shui divine nation was doomed. She could not do anything about the destruction of her country and the destruction of her family. How many times had she missed that peerlessly handsome young master whose robes fluttered in the wind? Yet, he still hadn't appeared. She knew that even if that young master came, he would not be able to turn the tide. But she still hid a trace of obsession in her heart. If she could see that person one more time before she died, she would have no regrets even if she died on the battlefield. At this moment, muffled rumbling sounds came from the north. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers surged toward the capital like a surging tide. But Lu Baishuang was not distracted. She ignored the murderous army and sank into her memories. She remembered that when the demon race invaded the kingdom of Baishuang, that young master was ordered by the divine master to go to the Sky Lion Pass to participate in the war. There, she met him for the first time. Lu Baishuang, you have been staring at me for an hour. Haven't you seen enough? I heard that you're not married and do not have a partner. Could it be that you have feelings for me? Young Master Ji, please respect yourself. Do not speak nonsense. That's right. I was afraid that you would be infatuated with me and have a crush on me. After all, I already have a family. You, Ji Tianxing, you egomaniac. Do you think this emperor will like you? Don't think too highly of yourself. This emperor does not like you at all. The conversation between the two of them when they first met lingered in Liu Baishuang's mind, lingering and becoming clearer. He even remembered the scene and the tone of his voice clearly, as if it had just happened yesterday. As she recalled this, Liu Baishuang's frosty expression softened. The corners of her mouth curled into a faint smile as she muttered to herself, "Hateful egomaniac, you've won in the end. If you knew the answer, you would definitely be narcissistic and proud. However, after tonight, there would be no more white frost in the world. In the end, I'm just a passerby." As soon as she finished speaking, she gathered her thoughts and looked towards the north with a cold and sharp gaze. Clang! Light flashed in his right hand, and a silver-white holy sword appeared. She held the sacred sword in her hand, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. Her entire body was bursting with a soaring, fighting spirit. Those who offend the Empire shall die. Her body turned into a ray of white light as she charged toward the heaven-destroying army in the north. At that instant, it was as if lightning had torn apart the night sky, causing the heavens and the earth to light up. After a short while, an earth-shattering battle broke out in the wilderness outside the capital. A colorful radiance of magic power shone, illuminating half of the sky. An earth-shattering sound reverberated in the sky. There were also deafening shouts, explosions, and cries of agony. The martial saint was enraged, and the heaven-destroying army suffered heavy casualties. Everything within a radius of a few hundred miles was affected. However, this was only the final radiance of the meteor before it fell. Not long after, a heaven-destroying elite cultivator in silver armor walked out of the pitch-black warship in the sky. This person stood at the bow of the warship and looked down coldly at the battlefield. He suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Whoosh! A dark red giant sword that was thousands of feet long slashed down as if it could split the heavens and earth. It instantly drowned the meteor. Bam! A loud sound reverberated, shaking the heavens. The meteor instantly collapsed, turning into dust that covered the sky and scattered on the wilderness outside the capital. She was born in this land and had risen in the wind and rain. In the end, she stepped onto the throne and controlled this land. In the end, she had lived and died with the Empire and returned to this land. Half an hour later, the pitch-black warship blasted open the northern gate of the capital, and the 400,000 heaven-destroying soldiers charged in. The 50,000 soldiers guarding the city were all old, weak, sick, and disabled. They could not resist for long before they were slaughtered by the army. The 500,000 civilians in the city had expected such an outcome. They were so sad that their hearts had given up and did not resist. For hours later, the capital of the White Frost Empire had completely fallen and was under the control of the heaven-destroying race. The army stationed themselves in the capital and used it as their base camp. In just 2 days, 3 more armies had gathered. A total of 6 million people guarded the capital. After the news spread, the entire White Frost Empire mourned, and their will to resist dissipated. The many main cities south of the capital fell into chaos. Countless people abandoned their cities and fled. Many city lords and generals decided to open their cities and surrender. The heaven-destroying race had killed Sacred Emperor White Frost and taken over the capital, causing the empire to fall apart. It would soon fall completely. At this moment, God Lord Luo Shui appeared out of nowhere. This was the first time she had appeared since the start of the war with the heaven-destroying race. No one knew what she had been doing in the past month. All they knew was that she had appeared in the capital of the White Frost Empire. After a heaven-shaking battle, she had slain 2 of the 3 martial god captains guarding the capital. One of them was the culprit who had killed Liu Baishuang. The battle had destroyed the dazzling imperial palace and reduced half of the capital to rubble. More than 200,000 soldiers of the heaven-destroying race had been wiped out. The surviving captain managed to escape from the capital alone, and only then did he manage to escape death. God Lord Luo Shui had then used a supreme technique to destroy the entire capital, reducing it to rubble. There was no doubt that the 1.6 million soldiers of the heaven-destroying race garrisoned in the city had all been killed. Even the 500,000 civilians in the city had been reduced to dust. When this news spread, it shocked all of the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Everyone said that the rage of a God Lord could shatter the heavens and earth. God Lord Luo Shui's actions were both to avenge Liu Baishuang and to deal a heavy blow to the heaven-destroying race. It was also a warning to those spineless people who had surrendered. As a result, the city lords and generals of the southern cities who wanted to flee and surrender had to think twice. The mighty divine might of the Luo Shui martial god roused the fighting spirit of countless soldiers and martial artists, and they once more became energetic and hot-blooded. After the battle for the capital of the White Frost Empire concluded, the Luo Shui martial god vanished without a trace. Several days later, she appeared on the battlefield of the Changlong Empire and personally killed an army. After a bloody battle, she had killed more than 200,000 soldiers and several dozen black-armored soldiers. The commander of the army had been killed and the warship destroyed, turning it into a pile of scrap metal. Those who were lucky enough to survive could only scatter in all directions and join up with the rest of the army. When this news spread, it once more shocked the world. Chapter 2400. For the next 2 months, the Luo Shui martial god appeared on the battlefield. Her whereabouts were mysterious and erratic, making it difficult for others to grasp. However, every time she appeared, she would deliver a thunderous blow. She would either kill a martial god captain or destroy a warship, or she would destroy the camp of the heaven-punishing army and kill hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Such a mysterious and unfathomable method of destroying the world caused the heaven-punishing race's army to tremble in fear. The soldiers and martial artists of the Luo Shui divine kingdom saw the dawn of victory and became spirited. They tried their best to resist the enemy's invasion. As a result, the heaven-punishing army had no choice but to slow down their attacks and withdraw their defenses. This was to restore morale and to prevent the Luo Shui martial god's sudden attack. The captains did not dare to act alone. They had to gather in groups of 4 or 5 to feel safe. And Yu cursed angrily for a long time when he saw that his attack plan was blocked. He even ordered a massacre. In order to take revenge on the Luo Shui martial god, he ordered his army to kill millions of civilians in every city they conquered to pressure the Luo Shui martial god. At the same time, General Dragon Subduing was furious when he heard the news and personally went to kill Luo Shui. As a result, these 2 months became the darkest period. The Luo Shui divine kingdom suffered unprecedented destruction. Hundreds of cities were destroyed, and at least 300 million civilians were killed. The territories of the White Frost Empire and the Changlong Empire were shrouded in bloody rain for a long time. The Luo Shui martial god's whereabouts were constantly exposed, and the situation became more and more dangerous. There were a few times when she was almost caught by General Dragon Subduing. As a result, she could only hide and deal with General Dragon Subduing. She was unwilling to face him head-on. While she was being held back, the Heaven-Punishing Tribe's army once again invaded the south. Very quickly, they conquered one city after another. At this time, 20 mysterious armies joined the battlefield and blocked the Heaven-Punishing army. These mysterious armies were clearly the elites of the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Each army had about 50,000 people, and their strength and battle skills were very high. They were proficient in guerrilla warfare and skirmish tactics. They did not face the heaven-punishing army head-on. They only attacked and harassed. As a result, they successfully delayed the heaven-punishing army's attack and caused the heaven-punishing army to be greatly troubled. After a dozen battles, the heaven-punishing army gradually understood the identity of the mysterious army. They were well-trained, elite, and had millions of people. Only the Divine Guard army of the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom matched these characteristics. The Divine Guard Corps was the sharp blade and sturdy shield that protected the Divine Nation. They were also the last force of the Divine Nation. Even the Divine Guard Legion had been mobilized. It was clear that the Luo Shui Divine Nation was at the end of its tether. Within the Nine Heavens, 10 Absolutes Pagoda, the sixth level of the dark space. The situation on Shinwu continent was unstable, and the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom was being ravaged by the flames of war. However, the interior of the Divine Pagoda was an otherworldly land and was not affected in the slightest. Only 2 months had passed in the outside world, but Ji Tianxing had already spent 8 years in the distorted space-time. In the past 8 years, he had continuously cast spells to control the Ninth Heaven Cauldron and refine the Burial of Heaven Sword. That crude sword embryo had long since turned into an ancient, clumsy, mysterious, and heavy black ancient sword. The body of the sword was narrow, long, and exquisite. It was covered in mysterious markings that formed 81 boundlessly vast divine diagrams that contained the profundities of the 9 heavens and 9 earth. The refining materials that Ji Tianxing had put into the cauldron had all been refined, leaving only some residue. The Burial of Heaven's Sword had finally been reborn and had returned to the ranks of divine artifacts. Ji Tianxing had been refining the Burial of Heaven's Sword for 14 years. It could no longer be described as tiring or exhausting. It was truly exhausting and tormenting. It seemed simple, but casting spells day after day was more dangerous than fighting thousands of battles. Of course, this was also a great training and improvement for him. His martial arts foundation and strength had also been strengthened and improved. He had silently broken through to the 9th level of the martial sage realm. On this day, Ji Tianxing finished casting his spells. After he retracted his palms, the 9th Heaven Cauldron also gradually stopped revolving. The flickering golden light quickly retracted. Within the Divine Cauldron, the surging divine flames gradually extinguished. Buzz! The Burial of Heaven sword that was floating within the divine flames seemed to have awakened. It shook violently and let out a joyful sword cry. Whoosh! The divine cauldron opened, and a dark golden divine flame rushed into the sky. The Burial of Heaven sword also flew out of the divine cauldron. It was wrapped in blazing golden flames and flew a few rounds around Ji Tianxing. Finally, when the golden divine flame extinguished, the Burial of Heaven sword had shrunk to 4 feet and returned to Ji Tianxing's hands. This is great. I have finally returned to the godly realm. I can roam the world and dominate the universe. The Burial of Heaven's voice rang in Ji Tianxing's mind. His tone was excited and his blood was boiling. Ji Tianxing's right hand held the sword hilt that still had some warmth. His left hand caressed the pitch-black blade as his eyes shone brightly. That's right. We have waited for this day for too long. The divine sword has returned. Once I break through to the godly realm, I will truly dominate the world and be invincible. The Burial of Heaven reminded again, although I have returned to the godly realm, I am currently only a low-grade void god artifact. I can barely deal with the battleships of the Heaven Slayer race. If you want to destroy the battleships like cutting vegetables, you have to recover to the middle grade. The materials of the battleships are not bad. After refining them, they can greatly increase the strength of the sword. You should collect more in the future. Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, Of course. I will dismantle the dozens of battleships of the Heaven Slayer race sooner or later and refine the materials on the spot. All right, it is still too early to talk about this. You should rest for a few years and recover your strength as soon as possible. I want to continue my seclusion and break through to the godly realm in one go. With that, he kept the Burial of Heaven sword and the 9th Heaven Cauldron and sat in the dark sky to cultivate. As time passed, the speed of his strength increasing became slower and slower. After reaching the rank 9 martial sage realm, it was extremely difficult to increase his strength. Ordinary martial sages usually had to cultivate for a few hundred years before they could increase their cultivation by 1 rank. Even Wu Duantian, who was known as the strongest person below the martial god realm, had to cultivate in seclusion for 400 years before he broke through to the rank 9 martial sage realm. In order to increase his strength, Ji Tianxing had put in a lot of effort and tried all kinds of methods. Not only did he cultivate the rank 8 Sword Soul Dao, but he also cultivated the Paragon Sword Body, the Galaxy Body Refinement Art, the Heaven-Piercing Sword Intent, and various trump cards. Other than those divine skills and super skills that he could not cultivate due to his cultivation realm, he had cultivated all kinds of secret skills. As a result, the speed of his strength increasing was much faster. 14 years later, his strength had reached the complete rank 9 martial sage realm, and he was only one step away from breaking through to the godly realm. However, he was stuck at the half step to the godly realm and could not advance any further. Even after 2 years of trying and breaking through, he was still unable to break through. Helplessly, he could only end his seclusion. He knew clearly that if he wanted to break through, it was not enough to just cultivate in seclusion. Chapter 24:01. After finishing his seclusion, Ji Tianxing went to visit Yun Yao and Ji Ke. Thousands of miles away from him, Yun Yao was sitting in the void, cultivating in seclusion. Her whole body was surrounded by colorful lights, emitting a strong and heavy aura, which made her look extraordinarily divine. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that she had also reached the peak of the 9th level of the martial saint realm, and her magic power had been condensed to the extreme. She was only one step away from transforming her magic power into divine power, and her Dharma body into a divine body, and she could break through to the God realm. However, it was this one step that shackled Yun Yao. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing sighed silently and woke her up with a sound transmission. After hearing his sound transmission, Yun Yao ended her cultivation and opened her eyes. Meeting Ji Tianxing's concerned gaze, she showed a regretful expression and said with a disappointed tone, "Tianxing, I failed." Ji Tianxing shook his head gently and comforted her, "Not only you, even I'm stuck at the half-step God realm and can't break through. There are as many martial artists in the world as grains of sand, and only 1 in a billion can step into the God realm. How can it be so easy? In our current state, it's useless to continue cultivating in seclusion. We have to look for opportunities and opportunities." Yin Yao nodded and said with a frown, "I tried for 3 years, but I still couldn't break through to the God realm. However, I am sure that the Divine Pearl is my opportunity. If I can find another Divine Pearl, I will definitely break through." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said solemnly, "Okay, then let's go and find the Divine Pearl." Yin Yao stood up and walked side by side with him. She had only taken 2 steps when she suddenly remembered something and stopped. "Right, we have been cultivating in seclusion for so many years. How is the situation in the continent?" Ji Tianxing calculated the time and said, "Previously, I spent 14 years to refine the burial of Heaven Sword before it became a divine artifact. After that, I cultivated in seclusion for another 16 years. We have been here for 30 years, but only 7 months have passed in the outside world. Even if the Heaven Punishers want to attack the Luo River Divine Kingdom, they won't be able to do it so quickly." Yin Yao nodded slightly and lowered her head to look at her swollen belly. She said thoughtfully, "It's been 30 years, but Chun Chun and Yaya still show no signs of being born. How many years will it take for these 2 little fellows to be born?" Ji Tianxing held her hand and said with a smile, "The children have been in your womb for more than 40 years, and they are growing and becoming stronger quickly. If they were to be born after 100 years of gestation, they would definitely have an innate saint body, a natural martial saint. If he was born after 1,000 years, he would have an innate divine body and a natural martial god. A child with such aptitude might not even appear in the history of a great world for tens of thousands of years." Yin Yao said in a gentle voice, "Although I really want to see them as soon as possible, if that's really the case, I'd rather have them gestate for 1,000 years and be born as gods. Don't be like us, who went through so many hardships in order to break through to the deity realm." Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. He pulled her and flew into the darkness. Before coming out of seclusion, let's take a look at Ku Ku's situation. After a while, the 2 of them flew in front of Ji Ke. Unexpectedly, Jiku had already come out of seclusion and was deep in thought with his eyes closed. She frowned, and her face was filled with worry and confusion. It was obvious that she was in a dilemma. Ji Tianxing called out to her, and she came to her senses. She quickly stood up and greeted him. "Brother Tianxing, eldest senior sister, why aren't you in seclusion?" Yin Yao explained in a gentle voice. "We have already reached the half-step to the divine realm, but we are unable to break through. We can only come out of seclusion to look for opportunities." Jiku's face was filled with shock. He said in disbelief, "Oh my God, you have already reached the full circle of the martial saint realm and reached the half-step to the divine realm? This speed is too shocking. It's a pity that I have only reached the 7th level of the martial saint realm after inheriting the demon god's legacy. I have also been stuck in a bottleneck for the past 2 years and have not been able to find an answer. My strength has also stagnated." As she spoke, her beautiful face was filled with loneliness and regret. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "You have inherited the legacy of the godly pagoda's owner. Only you can find the answer. Even I can't help you. However, I suggest that you stop your seclusion and come out with us. If you can find an opportunity and fortune, perhaps your confusion will be easily solved." Jika nodded and agreed without hesitation. "All right, I will listen to Brother Tianxing and come out with you. Oh yes, although my strength is stagnated, I still have good news to tell you." "What good news?" Yin Yao looked expectant. Jiku smiled mischievously and pointed at the dark space beneath his feet. He said, "This 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda has already been refined by me. It is connected to my soul, and I have complete control over it. With just a thought, I can put the godly pagoda into my palm and leave the yin-yang mystic realm. I can carry it with me." Both Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao were astonished, clicking their tongues in wonder. Jiku blinked and asked with a smile, "Why don't I show you how it works?" Ji Tianxing quickly waved his hand and dissuaded him. "No need. It is better to leave the godly pagoda in the mystic realm. It will not be discovered by outsiders, and it can block the heavenly Tao's detection. In the future, when we are fighting against the heaven punishers, if we are in danger, we can escape here instantly. If we carry it with us, we will be surrounded by the heaven punishers even if we hide in the godly pagoda." Jiku was enlightened and nodded in agreement. "All right, then let's leave it as it is." The 3 of them chatted for a while more before they left the godly pagoda and appeared at the peak of a barren mountain outside the mystic realm. It was late at night, and the moon was bright, and there were few stars in the sky. The 3 of them stood on a huge rock at the peak of the mountain and looked toward the south. Ji Tianxing took out a communication jade slip and sent it to Luo Shui to ask about the situation on the continent and the Luo Shui divine nation. It had been half a year since the heaven punishers had invaded the Luo Shui divine nation. In this half a year, the Luo Shui divine nation had suffered greatly. After being ravaged by the flames of war, it was now in ruins and covered in corpses. Baishuang, Changlong, Qiyang, and Tianwu had been conquered by the heaven punishers. Lu Baishuang had died in battle, the Changlong divine emperor had been killed, and the Qiyang and Tianwu divine emperors had also died in battle. Even a few civilian martial sages had been killed by the heaven punishers in the chaotic battle. In this war that had engulfed half of the divine nation, 600 million civilians had died tragically at the hands of the heaven punishers. 2 billion civilians had become slaves of the heaven punishers and lived in darkness and despair. There were also a few 100 million civilians who had been forced to abandon their homes and flee to the 5 countries in the south, becoming refugees. Half of the Luo Shui divine nation had fallen. More than half of the 1 million divine guards had been sacrificed in the war. Only about 300,000 people were still bitterly holding on. The heaven punishers had temporarily stopped their expansion and defended the 4 countries in the north. They had begun to rest and consolidate their rear. After all, the heaven punishers' momentum had already been established. As long as they could firmly control half of the continent and replenish the army with new blood, they would soon be able to conquer the other 5 empires. Thus, the heaven punishers were fighting steadily and were not in a hurry. As for the citizens of the 5 empires in the south, although they were temporarily safe, they were also deeply pessimistic and despaired. Everyone's hearts were heavy, as if there was a guillotine hanging over their heads that would soon fall. Under such circumstances, the citizens of the Luo Shui divine nation were in a state of panic and unrest. The entire Shenwu continent was also affected, and everyone was in a state of panic. Turbulence was surging in the dark. The various major races and martial organizations were all fearful of the Heaven Punisher's strength. Countless people were worried. Once the Heaven Punishers conquered the Luo Shui divine nation, they would definitely conquer the entire Shenwu continent. What had happened to the Luo Shui divine nation today was the future of the various divine nations and organizations. Chapter 2402. Ji Qianxing, Yin Yao, and Cuckoo quietly stood at the peak of a barren mountain, waiting for Luo Shui's reply. They had been in seclusion in the divine tower all this time, oblivious to the happenings of the world. They did not know about the situation on the Shenwu continent, nor did they know what had happened to the Luo Shui divine kingdom, until a ray of spiritual light flew over from the horizon and landed in Ji Qianxing's palm. Whoosh! After the spiritual light dissipated, a sparkling and translucent jade slip appeared. It had been sent back by Luo Shui. Ji Qianxing released his divine sense and entered it, beginning to read the information within. After just a few sentences, his expression changed drastically, and he frowned. When he finished reading the information in the jade slip, his expression was gloomy, and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. Seeing his strange expression, Yun Yao and Ji Ku revealed concerned expressions and hurriedly asked about it. Qianxing, what happened? Brother Qianxing, did something happen to the Luo Shui divine kingdom? Ji Qianxing nodded and explained in a heavy tone. Luo Shui sent a message saying that the Heaven Punisher has gathered an army of 10 million in the 72 cities and Tianzhu Mountain. Half a year ago, the Heaven Punisher led an army of 10 million and began to attack the Luo Shui divine kingdom. He told Yin Yao and Ji Ke the contents of the jade slip in full detail. After listening, the two of them had a clear understanding of the situation on the continent and the Luo Shui divine kingdom. The two of them also frowned, and their eyes were filled with anger and worry. The Luo Shui divine kingdom is really unfortunate. Not long ago, it was invaded by the demon race's army and was ravaged by the flames of war. Who would have thought that not long after, it would be invaded by the Heaven Punisher's army again? In just half a year, half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom has fallen? How powerful is the Heaven Punisher's army? Ji Qianxing looked towards the south with a burning gaze and said in a low voice, half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom's territory has been invaded, and only the 5 empires in the south are bitterly holding on. Luo Shui is being pursued by General Fu Long, and there is no chance for them to intercept the Heaven Punisher's army. According to the current situation, the Luo Shui divine kingdom would fall completely in a few months. No, we have to go help as soon as possible. Even if we can't stop the Heaven Punishing Race's army, we must try to delay their advance. Yin Yao and Ji Ku both nodded in agreement. All right, I can't sit back and watch the Luo Shui holy nation be invaded. Otherwise, the Heaven Punishers will become even more powerful, and no one will be able to stop them. After that, Yin Yao summoned the Glaze Fire Dragon and flew towards the south with Ji Qianxing and Ji Ke, within the Heaven Absolute God Nation, in the depths of the magnificent and majestic Divine Palace. Early in the morning, the secret chamber where martial god Tianzhu was cultivating in seclusion suddenly emitted a golden glow and a magnificent aura. The door of the secret chamber slowly opened. Martial god Tianzhu, who was wearing a golden dragon robe and a crown on his head, walked out in a majestic manner. After close to a year of closed-door recuperation, his injuries had finally healed, and his mental state had also recovered to its peak. Not only was he surrounded by a mysterious aura, but he also exuded a formless pressure. He had regained his previous majestic and domineering aura. The commander of the Divine Guards, Lu Jin, was already waiting outside the secret chamber. Seeing martial god Tianjue appear, Lu Jin quickly went forward and bowed respectfully. Your subordinate, Lu Jin, greets the divine master. Martial god Tianjue glanced at him and waved his hand. You may rise. As he spoke, he stepped into the dark passageway and walked towards the study. Lu Jin, I've been in seclusion for close to a year. Did anything major happen during this time? Martial god Tianjue was just asking casually. He mainly wanted to understand the situation of the Heaven Absolute God Nation. For example, did Luo Shui and Pillar of Heaven's Mountains take revenge? However, Lu Jin's face was filled with joy, and he said excitedly, Divine Master, half a year ago, something major did happen on the continent, and that shocking event is a joyous occasion for us. Martial god Tianjue immediately stopped in his tracks, his eyes filled with anticipation. He asked, "Oh, what joyous occasion is it?" Lu Jin explained with a smile. About 8 months ago, the heaven-punishing tribe destroyed Pillar of Heaven's Mountains and invaded its territory. Then, the heaven-punishing tribe gathered an army of 10 million in the 72 cities and Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. Hearing this, martial god Tianjue was shocked. He asked in disbelief, the heaven-punishing tribe army? Destroyed Pillar of Heaven's Mountains? What about Ji Tianxing? Is he dead? Was he killed by the heaven-punishing tribe? Lu Jin was stunned. He shook his head and said, I don't know. I only know that Pillar of Heaven's Mountains has been reduced to ruins. Ji Tianxing has never appeared again. Martial god Tianjue was slightly disappointed. He frowned and said, Continue. Lu Jin continued to report, half a year ago, the heaven-punishing tribe experts led an army of 10 million to wage war on the Luo Shui divine nation. In just half a year, the heaven-punishing tribe army invaded the 4 empires and enslaved billions of people. The Luo Shui divine nation was devastated. At least 1 billion people and soldiers were killed by the heaven-punishing tribe army. I heard that even the Divine Guard Legion of the Luo Shui divine nation suffered heavy casualties and is about to collapse. Martial god Tianjue was shocked again. He asked in disbelief, in just half a year, the heaven-punishing tribe army invaded half of the Luo Shui divine nation? The heaven-punishing tribe is so powerful, even Luo Shui can't stop them? Lu Jin's smile became even brighter. He said with joy, Of course. According to the information I found, Luo Shui is being hunted down by the heaven-punishing tribe leader. She can't even protect herself now. How can she care about the lives of the divine nation's people? Martial god Tianjue also smiled coldly. He nodded and said, This is great news. Ha ha ha, Luo Shui has always been cold and arrogant. I really want to see her being hunted down and fleeing in all directions. As he spoke, he stepped into the study and sat on the purple jade throne. Lu Jin stood in front of the table and said respectfully, Lord God, Luo Shui is a thorn in your side. Haven't you always wanted to get rid of her? Now that the Luo Shui divine nation is about to be destroyed and she's being hunted down by the heaven-punishing tribe, she can't even take care of herself. Isn't this the best time for you to kill her? Martial god Tianjue immediately fell silent. The gloating smile on his face gradually disappeared, and his expression became gloomy. Seeing his reaction, Lu Jin was shocked. He felt anxious and hurriedly knelt down to apologize. Lord God, please calm down. I didn't think carefully and boldly overstep my boundaries. Please punish me. Martial god Tianjue frowned. His expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, Lu Jin, now that Luo Shui has fallen to such a state, I am naturally gloating. However, the heaven-punishing tribe is an invader from the outside world. They are far more ferocious and powerful than the demons. If they successfully invade the Luo Shui divine nation and strengthen their forces, it is inevitable that their ambitions will swell and they will take over the entire Shenwu continent. Chapter 24:03. Martial god Tianju's words made Lu Jin frown. After pondering for a moment, Lu Jin thought of some comforting words and hurriedly tried to persuade him. Sir Divine Master, what you're saying is actually the concern of all the martial artists in the world. Currently, the entire continent is in a state of panic. All the divine kingdoms, races, and powers are in danger. It is widely rumored in the martial world that the Heaven Punishers are greedier and stronger than the demons. They will not be satisfied with just the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom's territory and will definitely invade the entire continent. However, I believe that these are groundless fears and delusions. Martial God Tianju raised his eyebrows and looked at him with a dignified gaze. He asked, "Oh, why do you say that?" Lu Jin respectfully explained, "Sir Divine Master, for the past year, I've been inquiring about the Heaven Punishers and have even received their help." Martial God Tianju revealed an understanding expression when he heard the word there, but he did not interrupt. Lu Jin continued, "According to what I know, the Heaven Punishers are all powerhouses, and even the most ordinary warrior is a martial saint. Every 100 martial saints are under the command of captain, and the captains are all martial gods. From this, it sounds like the Heaven Punishers are very powerful, and the entire continent cannot compare to them. However, the Heaven Punishers' greatest flaw is that they have too few people. Thus, if they want to invade a wider territory, they can only enslave martial artists from various races. According to my estimates, there are no more than 5,000 Heaven Punishers and no more than 50 martial god captains." Without waiting for him to finish, martial god Tianju frowned and cursed, "Bastard! Dozens of martial gods and thousands of martial saints? The entire Shinwu continent's powerhouses added together are not even a tenth of the Heaven Punishers' powerhouses. You call that too few people? With so many powerhouses, it's enough to destroy the entire Five Elements realm." Lu Jin shrunk his neck from the scolding and explained with an embarrassed smile, "Sir Divine Master, please calm down. At first glance, it sounds like the Heaven Punishers have a lot of powerhouses. However, don't forget that the Heaven Punishers do not just kill and conquer. Their goal is to invade territory. In this way, they will have to leave behind a portion of their powerhouses to guard their territory and only send out a portion to invade cities. Moreover, in the process of war, the powerhouses of the Heaven Punishers will constantly be injured and weakened." He observed martial god Tianju's reaction as he spoke. Seeing that martial god Tianju was deep in thought, he continued, "If the Heaven Punishers really take over the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom, they will have to leave half of their people to guard their territory. If they wanted to invade other territories, the number of experts they could use would be even fewer. Therefore, you don't have to worry. At least, you don't have to worry about it in the short term. The Heaven Punisher race's attack is definitely not that fast." Martial god Tianju pondered for a moment and nodded. "You're right. I'll continue to observe. Luo Shui is being hunted down by the leader of the Heaven Punishing race. I should not get involved for now. Actually, the person I want to kill the most is Ji Tianxing. As long as this person doesn't die, this god will feel like a fishbone is stuck in my throat, and I won't be able to eat or sleep in peace." Lu Jin hurriedly nodded and said indignantly, "That's right. This person really deserved to die. The entire god's nation will never forget the blood feud between the eldest and the fourth god's child." When Lu Jin mentioned martial god Tianju's sad matter, martial god Tianju's expression turned gloomy and murderous. He said coldly, "Lu Jin, continue to investigate the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom and the Heaven Punishers. I need to go out and kill Ji Tianxing personally. Even if I have to go to the ends of the earth, I will find him." Lu Jin naturally had no objections. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, sir." Martial god Tianju did not want to wait any longer. His figure flashed and left the study, disappearing into the sky. When Ji Tianxing and the other two arrived at the border of the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom, it was already 3 days later. The glazed fire dragon carried the three of them and soared high into the sky. This was the territory of the White Frost Empire. The three of them looked down at the mountain range and the land below, their expressions turning solemn. Originally, There were many ancient cities and passes on this land, and there were many villages and towns scattered between the mountains. Under the setting sun, the majestic mountain range and the ancient city's pass reflected each other's beauty, revealing a heavy and peaceful aura. However, at this moment, the mountains and the land were filled with cracks, and deep pits, gullies, and abysses could be seen everywhere. It was a shocking sight. The ancient cities were left with broken fences and dilapidated walls, and the villages and towns were in ruins. The heavens and the earth were dead silent, and there was almost no sign of living people. The destruction of the war had turned the border region into a land of death. It was a desolate and broken scene. Although the three of them had not personally experienced the war half a year ago, they had seen it with their own eyes. It was not difficult for them to imagine how tragic the war had been when they had seen it with their own eyes. The three of them were silent, and their hearts were filled with anger and killing intent. Only by killing the invading heaven punishers could they vent their anger. 8 hours later, it was deep into the night. The glazed fire dragon carried the three of them and flew over a majestic ancient city. This place was hundreds of thousands of miles away from the border. Although the ancient city had experienced the war, it had been repaired, leaving only some traces of the war. Most importantly, the ancient city was protected by a holy array, which was like a huge cage. There were hundreds of thousands of people living in the city, and there were 10 martial sage realm warriors guarding the city. There was no doubt that the city was controlled by the heaven punishers. Many people had become slaves and were forced to gather cultivation resources under the orders of the heaven punishers. Under Ji Tianxing's instructions, the glazed fire dragon stopped. Yun Yao immediately guessed his thoughts and asked, "Tianxing, do you plan to sneak into the city and kill the 10 heaven punishers?" Ji Tianxing nodded silently. Ji Ku persuaded him, "Brother Tianxing, there are many powerful martial artists in the heaven punishers. It is useless to kill the 10 heaven punishers. Instead, it will expose our whereabouts and attract a large number of powerful martial artists to attack us." Ji Tianxing said calmly, "I understand, but I will not be at ease if I don't kill the heaven punishers. Moreover, it is not easy to deal with the heaven punishers in one go. We have to accumulate and plan slowly. Even if the heaven punishers have thousands of warriors, I will kill them all sooner or later." As he spoke, he quietly landed outside the city. After using a few tricks and spending about 15 minutes, he broke through the protective array and tore a hole in it. Then, the three of them sneaked into the city and started the assassination. Ji Tianxing headed to the city governor's mansion and assassinated the 6 heaven punishers in the mansion. Ji Ku and Yun Yao headed to the north and south gates respectively and assassinated the 4 heaven punishers guarding the city. Everything was carried out in silence. After an hour, the three of them completed their mission and left quietly. Then, the three of them rode the glazed fire dragon south. Along the way, they sneaked into one city after another and continuously assassinated the heaven punishers guarding the city. After the heaven punishers had taken over the 4 great empires, this place was considered the hinterland and the situation had stabilized. Thus, there were only a few heaven punishers guarding each city. The martial god realm captains and millions of soldiers were at the front line in the south. Chapter 2404. The heaven punisher army had occupied half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom and had rested for 2 months. In the previous battle, the army of 10 million had lost more than 3 million. Only 6 million remained. After 2 months of rest, the heaven punisher had gathered another 3 million soldiers. The army had recovered to 10 million. After recuperating, they were even more powerful. General Fu Long kept the Luo Shui martial god busy so that he could not assassinate the heaven punisher. Thus, Yu decided to resume his journey and attack the 5 empires in the south. This time, he wanted to completely occupy the Luo Shui divine kingdom within half a year. But at this time, something major happened in the northernmost part of the continent. At noon, a bloody light shot into the sky from the Blood Sea Abyss in the depths of North Underworld Mountain. An enormous pillar of bloody light seemed to connect the heavens and the earth, shooting straight into the clouds. It was still clearly visible from hundreds of thousands of miles away. Such a worldly phenomenon gave off an earth-shaking demonic aura. Half of North Underworld Mountain was shrouded in bloody clouds. The demons were jubilant. Everyone knew that this was the sign of a demon race expert breaking through to the spirit realm. The leader of the demon race had finally returned to the spirit realm. Roar! Waves of blood surged beneath North Underworld Palace. A demonic roar that could shatter metal and rock and shake the world resounded. A black shadow as large as a mountain rose from the abyss and towered above the sky. It was a giant demon that was 3,000 feet tall and had the head of a bull. Its body was as sturdy as a mountain. It had 3 gigantic heads and 6 scarlet eyes that were as red as fire. On its broad and muscular back were 6 pairs of blade-like wings. Its 4 thick and muscular arms seemed to be able to pierce through the sky and crush the stars. This ferocious giant devil with unparalleled demonic aura was none other than the ancestor fiend god. It had been hiding in the Bloodsea Abyss for many years and had finally recovered to the spirit realm. This time, it had truly broken through to the spirit realm. Its demonic foundation was stable and it had many powerful abilities. When it stood proudly in the sky and roared, its thunderous voice shook the heavens and spread for tens of thousands of miles. This world belongs to this god. The death god has returned, and all those who disobey will die. All the demons in Biming Palace rushed out of the palace and respectfully knelt on the ground, kowtowing and worshipping in excitement. Not only that, but within a radius of 100,000 miles, all the demons who saw this phenomenon prostrated themselves on the ground, worshipping the ancestor demon god. On the square outside Biming Palace, the great demon Saint Ling Xian was kneeling on the ground, looking extremely excited. His eyes were bright like fire as he looked up at the sky and couldn't help but murmur, "This is great. This day had finally arrived. My clan has endured silently for so long, and we've finally made it. The primogenitor has returned to the godly realm, and the Grim Reaper has returned. The entire world will tremble." Ma Ta, who was kneeling next to him, was so excited that tears rolled down his cheeks. He laughed crazily. "Ah! The primogenitor has finally returned to the deity realm. The 3 martial gods are all trash. From today onwards, no matter if it is the 3 holy kingdoms or the heaven-slaying tribe, they will not be able to humiliate our tribe." As a devil saint, Batua was so agitated that he lost his composure, but no one thought it was inappropriate. After all, everyone was as excited as he was, or even more fanatical than him. The thunderous cheers lasted for a quarter of an hour before dissipating. When the demons gradually calmed down, the primogenitor demon god in the sky slowly descended to Biming Palace. Whoosh! It retracted its true form, which was over 10,000 meters tall, and turned into a giant in a black robe, which was over 20 feet tall and had 3 heads. Even though its body had shrunk by 1,000 times, its aura and power had not weakened. It was still extremely powerful. It stood tall and straight on the square, its eyes as red as fire as it quietly looked at the demons kneeling on the ground. Ling Xian, Ma Tuo, and the others hurriedly bowed and shouted in unison, "Welcome back, primogenitor. Primogenitor has returned to the godly realm and will rule the world." The primogenitor demon god slowly raised its 4 arms, indicating for everyone to rise. It opened its wide, bloody mouth, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth that flashed with cold light. Its voice was as deep as thunder as it said, "All of my people are this god's descendants. My clan was born noble and unparalleled in the world. We should have ruled the 10,000 worlds and suppressed the 10,000 races. However, after the ancient god war, this god has been silent for 30,000 years. In these 30,000 years, my people have withered and fallen to such a miserable state. Everyone in this world deserves to die. This god will use the power of the 3 calamities and 9 disasters to kill all those who have humiliated my clan. Soon, this god will make the entire world kneel at the feet of my clan. These domineering and authoritative words spread throughout the entire Biming Palace. The 1,000 demon experts felt their blood boil and their emotions surge as they cheered at the top of their lungs. After a long while, the primogenic demon god waved his hand, indicating for everyone to leave. It stepped across the square and entered the main hall of Biming Palace. The great demon Saint Ling Xian and the third demon, Saint Ma, brought 2 new demon saints into the main hall to await the primogenitor demon god's orders. The primogenitor demon god sat at the head of the table and looked at Ling Xian with an authoritative gaze. He asked in a deep voice, "Ling Xian, what is the current situation of the continent?" Ling Xian took a step forward and bowed respectfully. He said, reporting to primogenitor, "The heaven-punishing race has taken over half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom and caused the entire continent to panic. The heaven-punishing race has rested for 2 months and replenished their numbers to 10 million. I'm afraid that they will soon invade the south and completely take over the Luo Shui divine kingdom." The primogenitor demon god nodded slightly and asked, "What is the situation of my people?" Ling Xian reported again, "In the past 3 years, my people have been recuperating and have not been involved in any battles. Now, they have recovered a lot. If primogenitor wants to lead the army into battle, I can quickly gather 8 million warriors to die for you." Ling Xian, Ma Tuo, and the 2 new demon saints all thought that the primogenitor demon god had returned to the god realm and would definitely lead the army into battle and start massacre. Only then could he vent his anger and vent all the humiliation and resentment he had suffered. However, the primogenitor demon god shook his head lightly and said in an authoritative tone, "No, I'm not in a hurry to lead the army into battle. Previously, you said that there is a general dragon subduing race above in you, and that he is the leader of the heaven-punishing race?" "That's right." Ling Xian nodded. The primogenitor demon god revealed a meaningful look and said in a deep voice, "Immediately send a message to General Dragon subduing race. Tell him that I want to discuss something important with him face to face." Ling Xian was stunned and said with some astonishment, "Primogenitor, General Dragon subduing race has never shown himself in public, and his whereabouts are very mysterious. It is said that he is extremely powerful and far surpasses in you and all the other martial gods. He is said to be the strongest person in the divine martial continent. Do you really want to invite him to Biming Palace to discuss this matter face to face?" The primogenitor demon god glanced at him coldly and said with a cold smile, "The strongest person in the continent? Ha ha! No matter how high his realm is, he is only an empty god." Chapter 2405. The ancestor fiend god clearly did not take General Dragon subduing seriously. Such confident and domineering words shocked Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the rest. They all felt deeply proud. Deep in their hearts, they naturally had sufficient confidence. Ling Xian did not say anything else. He hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Yes, ancestor. I will send a message to General Dragon subduing." With that, he took out his communication jade slip and sent a message to General Dragon subduing on the spot. The ancestor fiend god pondered for a moment before asking, "Previously, you reported that the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was destroyed by the Heaven Punisher's army." "Yes." Ling Xian hurriedly nodded. The ancestor fiend god frowned and asked in a low voice, "The Pillar of Heaven's Mountains is Qin Shin's training ground. There must be Qin Shin's inheritance or treasures hidden there. Were there any strange phenomena after the Heaven Punishers destroyed the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains? Did they find any treasures?" Ling Xian shook his head and answered truthfully, "No. The Pillar of Heaven's Mountains was reduced to ruins like any other mountain. The Heaven Punisher's army built a new heaven-punishing palace on the ruins. Since then, the sword god has disappeared without a trace and hasn't reappeared since." The ancestor fiend god pondered for a moment and said in a cold voice, "Qin Shin did not appear in the battle of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains. That means he did not participate in the battle. He must still be alive." It's very likely that he's in hiding, recuperating, and restoring his strength so that he can take revenge in the future. Ling Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, Ancestor, Qin Shin is now surrounded by enemies. Not only is the Heaven Punishers looking for him, but even the Heavens in God Nation is looking for him. Don't you think we should make the first move and seize his bloodline and inheritance? The ancestor fiend god waved his hand and sneered mockingly. No need. I have already returned to the god realm and no longer need Qin Shin's blood to condense my divine body. Moreover, the Heaven Punishers are too ambitious and will definitely become a stumbling block for my race. We cannot let the Heaven Punishers succeed. Leaving Qin Shin to deal with them will weaken their strength. Ling Xian was enlightened and showed a sincere expression of admiration. He nodded and said, I see. The primogenitor was indeed far-sighted. The Heaven Punishers were in a hurry to expand and were determined to kill Luo Shui and Qin Shin. We'll wait until both sides are injured, and then we'll reap the benefits. The ancestor devil god smiled and nodded, saying in a low voice, It's good that you understand. No matter how strong the Heaven Punisher race was, it was only temporary. In the end, we will be the ones to rule this world. Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others all agreed. They were full of hope for the future. Not long after, a dark red blood light flew from the horizon and landed in front of Ling Xian. That was a mysterious blood jade. It was the message sent by the dragon subduing General. After Ling Xian read the message with his divine sense, a smile appeared on his face. Ancestor, General Fu Long said that he had long wanted to meet you. Since you've invited him, of course he'll have to accept. Ling Xian bowed towards the ancestral fiend celestial and conveyed the message truthfully. Very quickly, 2 days passed. On the morning of the third day, Baiming Palace was decorated in a grand and solemn manner. There were even ceremonial guards in the square outside the palace. At 9 in the morning, Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others walked out of the palace and waited in the square to welcome General Fu Long. Not long after, a black shadow came from the south and traveled 100 miles in an instant. Swoosh! The black shadow stopped in the sky above Baiming Palace and revealed its true appearance. It was a battleship that was 10,000 feet long. The battleship hung high in the sky. After the door opened, a huge monster walked out. This was a half-human, half-beast monster. Its body was covered in black dragon scales, and 2 ferocious black dragons poked out of its shoulders. It was surrounded by a mysterious black aura. Without a doubt, this was the leader of the Heaven Punisher race, General Fu Long. Behind him were 4 black armored guards from the Heaven Punishing clan. General Fu Long led the 4 guards and descended from the sky, landing in the square outside the palace. Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others immediately went forward and bowed with a smile. Welcome, General Fu Long. Our ancestor has been waiting for a long time. Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others were full of confidence. Their attitude towards General Fu Long was considered polite, but they were not respectful or humble enough. General Fu Long sensed that something was amiss. He only nodded slightly and did not say anything. After that, Ling Xian, Ta Tuo, and the others escorted General Fu Long out of the square and into the conference hall. The ancestor fiend celestial was sitting on the main seat in the cold and gloomy conference hall. At that moment, he was only a black-robed giant that was 20 feet tall and had 3 huge heads. In terms of appearance and size, he was obviously not as domineering as General Fu Long. However, the ancestor fiend celestial's aura was more mysterious and gloomy. His aura was no weaker than General Fu Long's. General Fu Long came to the center of the hall and sized up the ancestor fiend celestial. The purple fire in his eyes flickered continuously. The ancestor fiend celestial also looked at him and sized him up from head to toe. The 2 of them looked at each other for a moment before retracting their gazes. The ancestor fiend celestial raised his hand and said in a low voice, Welcome, General Fu Long, to Baiming Palace. Please take a seat. General Fu Long grinned and said with a faint smile, There is no need to sit. Lord Fiend Celestial, please get to the point. With his size, the seats in the hall were clearly too small, so he simply stood and spoke. The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not force him, and said with a playful expression, "Looks like General Fu Long has put in a lot of effort. You have actually grasped my race's language." General Fu Long maintained his fake smile and said calmly, "If not, how would I be able to communicate with Lord Fiend Celestial?" He. The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered, and his gaze became even sharper. "I'm afraid that it's not just my race's language, but also the human language and the situation in the Shinwu continent. General Fu Long has grasped them all." General Fu Long raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, "Since I have come to this world, I have to learn and adapt. In the human language that I recently learned, this is called, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in Rome, do as the Romans do." The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered again. "I'm afraid you have other motives?" The purple fire in General Fu Long's eyes flickered as he looked at the ancestor Fiend Celestial. "I don't understand. Lord Fiend Celestial, please speak your mind." "All right." The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not beat around the bush and retracted his sneer. With a solemn expression, he said, "The Heaven Punisher first occupied the 5 southern regions of my race, then took over the 72 cities and Tianzhu Mountain. Now, they have even taken over half of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. The Heaven Punisher has swallowed mountains and rivers and pointed their swords at the entire continent. Have they thought of the consequences?" General Fu Long said expressionlessly, "War and slaughter are nothing more than the winners taking all. What consequences can there be? Moreover, with my race's strength and influence, it is easy for us to sweep through the entire continent." The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered again and said with a playful tone, General Fu Long is really confident." Chapter 2406. The ancestor Fiend Celestial's words caused General Dragon Subduing to frown. "What do you mean?" Although General Dragon Subduing was very confident in the strength of the Heaven Punisher tribe, he did not refute the ancestor Fiend Celestial, because he knew that if the current situation continued, the number of soldiers and captains of the Heaven Punisher tribe would definitely decrease. Because of this, he proposed the plan of using the weak to defeat the weak. The ancestor Fiend Celestial looked at General Dragon Subduing and said solemnly, "Instead of a Pyrrhic victory, why not cooperate and win together?" Before General Dragon Subduing came, he had already guessed the ancestor Fiend Celestial's motive. Hearing this, he did not find it strange at all. He asked calmly, "How do we cooperate?" The ancestor Fiend Celestial smiled and said, "Very simple. You and I will cooperate and divide the world equally." General Dragon Subduing sneered in his heart, but his expression did not change. He said, "I have also thought of the suggestion. We can discuss it." Seeing that General Dragon Subduing did not reject, the ancestor Fiend Celestial was reassured. He nodded and said, "It seems that we are in agreement. Since this is the case, let's cut the crap and discuss the cooperation directly. First, we must cooperate fairly and show our sincerity." General Dragon Subduing nodded in agreement and added, "Besides sincerity, we must trust each other." The ancestor Fiend Celestial grinned and said in a low voice, "That's right." Then General Dragon Subduing, "Please return the 5 southern regions to my tribe. After all, that is the territory of the North Underworld Mountain, and there are many demon race citizens there." General Dragon Subduing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "The 5 southern regions are originally Lord Fiend Celestial's territory. I do not want to keep occupying it. Since it is a cooperation, I can return the 5 southern regions. But I have shown my sincerity, and I hope Lord Fiend Celestial can show his sincerity." "What sincerity?" The ancestor Fiend Celestial looked at him with bright eyes. General Dragon Subduing raised his right hand and extended 3 fingers. "In order to attack the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, my tribe has lost many soldiers and suffered heavy casualties. Lord Fiend Celestial, please send 3 million demon warriors to help me." Hearing this request, the ancestor Fiend Celestial Ling Xian and Ba Tuo all frowned. Especially Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the two new devil sages. Their expressions changed on the spot, and they almost cursed out loud. The current Dark North Mountain could only recruit 8 million warriors, even if they tried their best. The moment the dragon-subduing general opened his mouth, he asked for 3 million warriors. This was definitely an exorbitant demand, seizing the chance to blackmail. However, with the ancestral archdevil god present, Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the rest did not dare to interrupt. They could only suppress their anger. The ancestor fiend celestial pondered for a moment before saying in a solemn tone, "General Fu Long, isn't it too laughable that you want this god to use 3 million warriors to exchange for the 5 regions in the south? If you really need 3 million warriors, this god can give it to you. However, this is a fair cooperation, and the territories we occupy will be equally divided. As for the 4 northern nations of the Luo Shui God Nation, you have to leave them to my clan to guard. The 5 empires in the south will belong to the Heaven Punisher race." The dragon-subduing general's pupils instantly contracted, and the purple flames in his eyes flickered several times. Anger surged in his heart, and he almost lost his temper. After trying his best to suppress his anger, he sneered and said, "Lord Godfiend, you must be joking. The 4 empires in the north of the Luo Shui God Nation were conquered by my clan after spending half a year and sacrificing over 3 million soldiers. Even if I am willing to hand them over to you, the Heaven Punisher race's soldiers will definitely not agree." The ancestor fiend celestial pretended to think for a moment before saying, Since this is the case, this god will not force you. We will not give up the 4 northern nations. The Heaven Punisher race's army will stop attacking and leave the 5 southern empires to my clan. We will divide the Luo Shui God Nation equally. If you still want to fight, you can lead the army to attack the vast God Nation." Before he could finish speaking, the dragon-subduing general interrupted him with a solemn expression. "Lord Godfiend, since this god is leading the army to attack the Luo Shui God Nation, this God Nation will definitely be taken over. As for the vast God Nation, if Lord Godfiend is interested, you can lead the army to attack. This god will not interfere. At that time, this God Nation will be occupied by the Luo Shui God Nation, and Lord Godfiend will occupy the vast God Nation. When only the Heaven Punisher God Nation is left, we will join forces to attack and divide the territory of the Heaven Punisher God Nation equally. Isn't this the best of both worlds?" The ancestor fiend celestial's expression darkened as he said in a low voice, "This is fair, but this god cannot lend you those 3 million soldiers. Otherwise, how will my clan have the manpower to attack the vast God Nation?" The dragon-subduing general nodded and said regretfully, "Lord Godfiend's words make sense. If this is the case, then this god cannot return the 5 southern regions. Otherwise, my clan's resources and manpower will not be enough." At this point, this negotiation was considered to have collapsed. The ancestor fiend celestial's aura became even more gloomy as he said with a cold expression, "In that case, the dragon-subduing general is not willing to cooperate with this god?" The dragon-subduing general spread out his hands and sneered. "It is not that this god is unwilling, but Lord Godfiend has no sincerity. This god is also in a difficult position." Before he could finish speaking, a blood-red light sped over from the sky outside the main hall. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, that blood-red light flew into the main hall and landed beside the dragon-subduing general. After the blood-red light dissipated, a piece of communication blood jade appeared. A black-armored guard picked up the blood jade. After reading the message inside, he reported to the dragon-subduing general, reporting to General, Deputy General, and has sent an urgent message. A few mysterious experts have infiltrated the Luo Shui God Nation and are assassinating our soldiers. As of now, 2 captains and over 200 soldiers have been killed. Deputy General and guesses that those mysterious experts are most likely Ji Tianxing. Suddenly hearing this news, the dragon-subduing general's heart burned with anger as his eyes flashed with killing intent. He hurriedly suppressed his anger and turned to the ancestor Fiend Celestial. Lord God Fiend, today's negotiation shall end here. This god shall take his leave. Seeing that he was about to turn and leave, the ancestor Fiend Celestial revealed a meaningful smile as he slowly raised his hand and said, General Dragon Subduing, please wait. Looks like you're in trouble. Let this god guess. It is most likely related to the Luo Shui martial god, or Ji Tianxing. The dragon subduing general did not reply, which meant that he had silently agreed. The ancestor Fiend Celestial smiled playfully and said, Looks like this god guessed correctly. That's right, those two fellows are very difficult to deal with and will definitely become a huge problem for you. Why don't we take this opportunity to make a deal? What deal? The dragon subduing general frowned as he looked at him. The ancestor Fiend Celestial said confidently, This god will help you kill Ji Tianxing, and you will return the 5 regions of the south. The dragon subduing general said indifferently, He is just a martial saint. This god can kill him with a snap of my fingers. His life is not worth this god giving up the 5 regions of the south. He, the ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered. If that is the case, how can he live until now? To tell you the truth, he is Kenshin from 1,000 years ago, the god king who controlled all the gods. Chapter 2407. As for Ji Tianxing's identity, General Dragon Subduing had sent men to investigate. As such, he knew that the ancestor demon god was not exaggerating. After pondering for a while, General Dragon Subduing asked, Lord Demon God, how confident are you? The ancestor Fiend Celestial sneered and said with certainty, 100%. General Dragon Subduing's body shook as he looked at the ancestor demon god. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. The ancestor demon god's aura is unfathomable, and his strength can threaten me. I cannot underestimate him. Rumor has it that he is the ancient great demon god and has killed numerous deities. He is known as the terrifying death god. If these rumors are true, then it should be easy for him to deal with Ji Tianxing, who is a martial sage. General Dragon Subduing nodded and agreed to the deal. Good. I agree to this deal. Take it as our first cooperation. The ancestor demon god smiled confidently and said in a low voice, General, please wait for my good news and prepare to return the 5 regions of the south. Goodbye. General Dragon Subduing cupped his hands and walked out of the hall. Take care. The ancestor demon god sat on the throne and looked at General Dragon Subduing's back view as he sneered. After a while, General Dragon Subduing boarded the battleship and left quickly. The ancestor demon god stood up and waved his hand, indicating for Ling Xian, Ming Tuo, and the rest to leave. Ling Xian hesitated for a while and asked with a frown, Ancestor Tianju martial god is currently looking for Ji Tianxing. With his help, he will be able to kill Ji Tianxing. Do you still want to make a trip down personally? Of course. The ancestor demon god nodded without hesitation and said, Tianju has already attacked twice but failed to kill Ji Tianxing. This proves that he is incompetent. Only when this deity personally makes a move can Ji Tianxing be completely eliminated. It has been almost 10 years since the battle back then. This time, I will make him disappear forever. A voice that was as oppressive as thunder reverberated in the hall, and it contained a soul-stirring, killing intent. In the Luo Shui Holy Kingdom, the 7 million troops of the Heaven Punishing Tribe had already led their troops south to attack the 5 nations in the south. The remaining 300,000 divine guards were roaming the front lines, trying their best to stop the invasion of the Heaven Punisher army. The Luo Shui martial god, who had been chased for a long time and hadn't shown himself for 2 months, started his assassination plan again. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and the other 2 were also within the borders of the Crimson Sun Empire. They were constantly assassinating the soldiers and captains of the Heaven Punishers. In the past half a month, 3 captains at the martial god realm and more than 400 warriors from the Heaven Punishing clan had died at their swords. After the news spread, it caused quite a commotion in the 4 empires. Originally, the Heaven Punishing race's army had already firmly controlled the territories of the 4 kingdoms. They treated this place as their rear and only left behind a few soldiers to guard it. Now that there were frequent assassinations, the soldiers of the Heaven Punishing clan were all anxious and worried. However, they couldn't give up their territory. They could only hide and pray that General Dragon's subduing would deal with Ji Tianqing soon. Late that night, the wind was biting cold and snow was swirling in the air. The Glaze Fire Dragon carried Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku as it flew over the star-moon wasteland of the Crimson Sun Empire. Their target was the Crimson Sun City at the end of the star-moon wasteland. That was the imperial capital of the Crimson Sun Empire, which had long been occupied by the Heaven Punishers. There were 300,000 soldiers, 30 black-armored warriors, and 1 captain stationed there. In the past half a month, we have been active in the Baishuang and Changlong Empire. After assassinating 2 captains and hundreds of warriors from the Heaven Punishers, our whereabouts must have been exposed. Now, and you and General Dragon, subduing, must be looking for us. Ji Tianqing stood on the dragon's back and looked at the night sky in front of him as he spoke with a calm expression. Ji Ku continued, "Therefore, we have to catch them off guard and directly rush to the imperial capital of the Crimson Sun Empire. There are hundreds of warriors from the Heaven Punishers in the Crimson Sun Empire, but there are only 2 captains. As long as we kill one of them, the pressure on the Crimson Sun Empire will be greatly reduced." Yin Yao shook her head gently and said in a low voice, "Not only will it reduce the pressure on the Crimson Sun Empire, but it will also reduce the pressure on the 5 countries in the south. The Heaven Punishers are attacking the 5 countries in the south, and we cannot fight them head-on. We can only create chaos in the 4 countries in the north. Hopefully, we can restrain the Heaven Punishers so that they cannot attack recklessly. Only by stalling for time will we have the hope of turning the tables." Ji Tianqing nodded and comforted them. "We have not broken through to the immortal state yet, so we cannot fight the Heaven Punishers head-on. But don't worry, I believe that day will come soon. Previously, when we fought with the martial god captains, we benefited a lot, and our strength is slowly increasing. I have a feeling that if we go through a few more battles of life and death, we might be able to break through the shackles." Yin Yao and Ji Ku looked expectant as they nodded to show that they understood. An hour later, the Glaze Fire Dragon arrived at the end of the Star-Moon Wasteland and stopped in the night sky. A few hundred miles in front of them, there was a majestic and solemn ancient city that stood quietly in the night sky. It was late at night, but only a few lights were lit in the vast and majestic ancient city. It was cold and quiet. Yun Yao put away the Glaze Fire Dragon, and the 3 of them stood side by side in the night sky. Ji Tianqing looked at the ancient city and said in a low voice, "That is the Crimson Sun Imperial Capital. Act according to the plan and be careful." After saying that, he led Yun Yao and Ji Ku toward the imperial capital. The imperial capital was enveloped by a divine formation, but Ji Tianqing only used an hour to break it. After tearing a hole in the formation, the 3 of them passed through the hole and quietly entered the city. Ji Tianqing went to the imperial palace alone, while Yun Yao and Ji Ku split up to assassinate the Heaven Punishers in the city. A silent massacre unfolded under the night sky. The Arch Palace was heavily guarded, with a large number of soldiers standing guard. There were also a dozen or so Heaven Punishing race warriors and a captain. After Ji Tianqing sneaked into the Imperial Palace, he quickly killed 12 Heaven Punishers. There were only 2 Heaven Punishers left, but they were with the captain. The 3 of them were discussing military matters in the Imperial Study, which was heavily guarded outside. Ji Tianqing remained invisible and easily hid from the guards and sentries, sneaking into the study. Swish! With a flash of golden light, the god-killing flying knife left his hand and drew an arc in the air. Bang bang! With 2 muffled sounds, the god-killing flying knife pierced through the chests of the 2 Heaven Punishers, and they fell to the ground dead. Dark red blood splattered on the captain's silver armor, which looked extremely shocking under the light. The silver-armored captain, who was sitting in front of the table, immediately turned pale and stood up. He was shocked and angry. Without hesitation, he took out his bronze sword and slashed at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't dodge. He held the sword of burial of heaven in his hand and went forward bravely. Swish, swish, swish. He held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and instantly shot out 7 beams of starlight like the Big Dipper. Chapter 24:08. Bang, bang, bang. The blood-red blade light collided with the starry sword light, causing a series of muffled sounds to ring out. Light scattered in all directions, and a violent gale wreaked havoc, sweeping through the entire palace. All of a sudden, the surrounding palaces and buildings collapsed and turned into ruins. The silver-armored captain, who was a LV-3 martial god realm expert, was sent flying by the sword light and crashed into the ruins. Even though he was only slightly injured, his body was covered in dust, and he looked rather disheveled. He roared angrily and leaped up from the ruins, glaring at Ji Tianqing with eyes as red as fire. Despicable human, you must be that bastard, Ji Tianqing. The captain glared at Ji Tianqing as he shouted in a thunderous voice. It was obvious that he had already received news that Ji Tianqing was going around assassinating the Heaven Punisher soldiers. Ji Tianqing looked at him coldly and said mockingly, "I didn't expect that all of you would have learned the human language. How ambitious!" In the past half a month, the captains that Lu Yin had killed had all learned the human language. From this, it could be seen that the Heaven Punisher had a grand plan. They wanted to take over the entire 5 Elements realm and enslave 10 billion humans. So what if I am? The captain sneered and said with a proud expression, "You think you could destroy my clan's plan to rule the Shinwu continent? You're like a mantis trying to stop a chariot." As he spoke, he gripped his bronze war blade with both hands and charged at Ji Tianqing without any regard for his own safety. He slashed out dozens of blood-red blade lights. The dark sky was immediately illuminated by the blood-red light, which was dazzling and eye-catching. Ji Tianqing stood in the midst of the blood-red light, but he was fearless. Golden light surged out of his body, and his body instantly swelled to 30 meters tall, turning into a golden-armored giant. His battle prowess also soared by 6 times, surpassing the martial sage realm, and his aura was even more powerful than the captain's. Heavenly Dragon Slash. He roared and gripped the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, brazenly slashing out a 3,000-meter-long golden dragon shadow. Boom! Amidst an earth-shattering boom, the golden dragon's silhouette smashed through a dozen or so streaks of crimson light and struck the silver-armored captain. Pooh! The silver-armored captain's expression changed drastically. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he was sent flying backward. A crack appeared on the armor around his waist, revealing his flesh and bones. The divine artifact silver armor could not withstand the sharpness of the sword of burial of heaven. Just a little bit more, and he would have been cut in half. Plop! The captain was sent flying backward for tens of miles, smashing into a collapsed palace. Heavily injured, blood kept flowing out of his mouth and nose, and he let out a painful groan. However, before he could get up, Ji Tianqing chased after him again. 10,000 swords become one. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, raised it high, and slashed down fiercely. In an instant, nearly 10,000 sword shadows appeared in the sky. Swish! Swish! Dense, starry sword light poured down from the sky like raindrops and gathered on the sword of burial of heaven. In the end, it turned into a giant starry sword that was thousands of feet long. This sword was formed by the condensation of tens of thousands of starry sword shadows. It gathered the endless power of the stars and contained terrifying power. The silver-armored captain's face was full of horror, and his eyes were full of despair. His fighting spirit and will to fight immediately crumbled and fell apart. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to escape. However, half of the imperial capital was shrouded by Ji Tianqing's sword will of heaven. The area within 100 miles was sealed by an invisible pressure. The silver-armored captain wanted to teleport away, but he was like a frozen fly, unable to move. At the critical moment of life and death, He could only hold the bronze battle saber high above his head with both hands and block with all his strength. Boom! In the next moment, the giant starry sword slashed down with an earth-shattering boom. The blood-red saber light collapsed, and the bronze battle saber was broken into 4 pieces on the spot. The silver-armored captain's burly body was also split into 2 from head to toe by the giant sword. The 2 halves of his body could not withstand the destructive power of the sword light and exploded into powder on the spot. The silver-armored captain was dead. He was killed by Ji Tianxing with 1 strike. Ji Tianxing was only half a step away from the divine realm, but he only used 3 moves to kill a LV-3 martial god realm expert. Such powerful combat strength shattered the consensus of the martial arts world. No one had expected such an unimaginable outcome. The giant starry sword that was thousands of feet long was weakened after killing the silver-armored captain. Bang! The giant sword hit the ground with a deafening boom. Suddenly, a 100-mile-long ravine appeared on the ground, dividing the imperial capital into 2 halves. The ravine was bottomless and as dark as ink. It was like a terrifying abyss. The area within a 1,000-mile radius shook, and countless cracks appeared on the ground. The imperial capital was in complete chaos. Countless houses and buildings collapsed into ruins, raising smoke and dust that covered the sky and the sun. Hundreds of thousands of people screamed in horror and ran away in panic. After a long time, when the smoke and dust in the sky and the deafening boom dissipated, the imperial capital had been reduced to ruins. The power of 1 strike could destroy a majestic city. The Tao of Kenshin was so terrifying. Ji Tianxing slowly put away the burial of Heaven's sword and glanced at the abyss under his feet. He said expressionlessly, "It's a pity that there was only 1 captain. The battle ended as soon as I used my full strength. If there were more captains, the battle would have lasted longer and the situation would have been more dangerous. Then I would have been able to stimulate my potential. In this way, there would be hope for me to break through the shackles." He muttered a few words to himself, his tone somewhat regretful. At this moment, Yun Yao and Ji Ku also completed their tasks and came to his side. Swoosh! The 2 girls landed beside him and glanced at the abyss and ruins. They asked in unison, "Tianxing, brother, has it been settled?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, "The news will spread very quickly. I reckon that General Dragon Fu and you will come here tomorrow morning. We have to go." After saying that, he flew out of the city with Yun Yao and Ji Ku. After succeeding in 1 strike, they had to quickly escape. This was the only way to avoid being caught by General Dragon Fu. The 3 of them flew out of the imperial capital and cut through the night sky at lightning speed, flying towards the south. However, they had only flown a few hundred miles when a bright golden light lit up the night sky in front of them. Crack! The night sky that was thousands of feet above the ground was torn apart by that golden light, revealing a huge gap. Swoosh! A tall and burly figure in a golden robe stepped out of the gap and stood proudly high in the sky. It was a middle-aged man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious crown. He blocked Ji Tianxing's path and sized up everyone with a cold gaze. Ji Tianxing was no stranger to him. After taking a closer look at his appearance, he instantly frowned. Martial god Tianju? Yin Yao and Ji Ku's expressions also changed. They muttered in confusion, "Damn it! Why is he here?" Chapter 2409. Without a doubt, the person who appeared was martial god Tianju. He stood proudly in the night sky with his hands behind his back, looking down at Ji Tianxing and the other 2. He, Ji Tianxing, I've been looking for you for a month, and I've finally found you. Martial god Tianju smirked and said mockingly, "This time, you don't have that bitch Luo Shui to protect you. I'd like to see how you're going to escape from me." In fact, this was the 3rd time he had tried to kill Ji Tianxing. If he failed again, it would be a great humiliation. However, martial god Tianju believed that without martial god Luo Shui's protection, Ji Tianxing would definitely die. Therefore, he was confident and had a card up his sleeve. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly as a playful smile appeared on his face. Escape? Why should I escape? Martial god Tianju was stunned for a moment before he burst out laughing. Ha ha! It seems like you know your place, and you know that you can't escape from me. If that's the case, there's no need to waste my breath. Take your own life. After all, you were once the strongest person in the continent, the deity king who controlled all the deities. I'll give you a dignified death and let you keep your corpse intact. Upon hearing this, Yun Yao and Ji Ku's faces turned cold. They held their swords and stared at martial god Tianju with murderous intent. Ji Tianxing's smirk deepened as he looked at martial god Tianju with disdain and said, Tianju, you're really confident and arrogant. However, you'll soon find out that you're the one who's going to escape. As he spoke, he slowly raised the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand and pointed it at martial god Tianju. An overbearing aura burst out from his body. Martial god Tianju laughed disdainfully and said, Kenshin, oh Kenshin, I didn't expect you to be an exception. With two beauties by your side, you dare to spout such nonsense for the sake of face and dignity. What a joke. Since you don't know what's good for you, then this god will personally send you on your way. Then, martial god Tianju waved his sleeves and shot out gold and silver light pillars from his palms. They poured down like a flood. All of a sudden, everything within 1,000 miles was illuminated by golden and silver starlight. The gold and silver light pillars released a destructive pressure that enveloped Ji, Tianxing, and the other two. Yun Yao and Ji Ku acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. They quickly unleashed their trump cards and launched a counterattack. Milky Way ribbon. Yun Yao waved her shadowless dual swords and slashed out a huge crescent-shaped sword light towards the golden light pillar. Sacred fire soaring the heavens. Jiku also let out a roar and slashed out two huge flaming swords. The two of them knew how terrifying martial god Tianju's power was. They used all of their power without holding anything back. However, their power was far from martial god Tianju's. Pung pung pung. Amidst the deafening noise, the Milky Way ribbon and the huge flaming swords struck the gold and silver light pillars and collapsed on the spot. Billions of silver and golden red fragments scattered in the night sky. It was extremely dazzling. The power of the gold and silver light pillars did not diminish. They were like two divine dragons that blasted towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not dare to be careless. He immediately unleashed the celestial dragon tyrant body and turned into a 30-meter tall, golden armored giant. The surface of his body was covered with dense golden dragon scales. His shoulders and knees even protruded with sharp dragon spikes. This was the perfect form of the celestial dragon tyrant body. Ji Tianxing had obviously pushed his power to the extreme. 10,000 swords were turned to one. He shouted angrily. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed at the gold and silver light pillars. Suddenly, the sky lit up with tens of thousands of cold lights, and dense starlight, sword light descended. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of sword light gathered on the sword of burial of heaven and formed a huge starlight sword that was 1,000 feet long. Kaboom! The huge starlight sword struck the gold and silver light pillars. An earth-shattering noise erupted and spread for thousands of miles. The thunderous sound waves made the earth within a radius of thousands of miles tremble. Within hundreds of miles, several mountain peaks cracked and collapsed with countless gravel. The huge starlight sword and the gold and silver light pillars collapsed at the same time. Billions of light fragments rained down like a torrential rain, covering the sky and the sun. The violent and devastating shock waves swept across thousands of miles. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku were all sent flying by the shock waves. Blood flowed out of their mouths and noses. A huge crater of 200 miles was blasted out of the ground. The nearby mountains were also razed to the ground. Such power was enough to destroy the world. Plop, plop, plop. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku were sent flying dozens of miles away. They smashed into the ruins one after another, splashing a large cloud of dust. The two sides had only exchanged one blow, and the three of them were already injured. Tianxing raised his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. His figure flashed and charged into the sky, facing martial god Tian Ju even more valiantly. God's slaying sword. He swung the burial of heaven sword with all his might and slashed out a dazzling golden giant sword toward martial god Tianju. Yin Yao also flew into the sky. She held the shadowless sword tightly with both hands and stabbed out with all her might, aiming for martial god Tianju's vital points. Jike stood in the night sky. He waved his hand and formed a mysterious seal. A mountain-sized firebird phantom appeared in the night sky. Burning wrath of heaven, she shouted and slowly pushed her hands forward. Immediately, the majestic firebird phantom pounced at martial god Tian Ju from the sky with a divine flame that could burn the world. The three of them spread out and surrounded martial god Tian Ju, attacking him with all their might. Martial god Tian Ju was fighting one against three, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, his fighting spirit was high. The divine power in his body surged, causing his golden robe and long hair to flutter in the wind. He looked extremely domineering and confident. Even if you were once a divine king who dominated the galaxy, you are now just a puny martial saint. What can you do if I kill you tonight? Are you angry? Are you desperate? That's right. I will trample you under my feet and step on your corpse to reach the peak of martial arts. As he spoke, martial god Tianju formed a seal with both hands and formed a mysterious seal. Swish, swish, swish. Gold and silver divine power surged out of his palms and formed a huge vortex in the night sky in front of him. This was the shifting stars technique. Boom, boom, boom. The god's slaying sword, more than 30 shadowless swords, and the mountain-sized firebird phantom were all blocked by the gold and silver vortex. A loud explosion shook the heavens. The sword light shattered and the firebird phantom collapsed. The gold and silver vortex trembled and changed shape but did not shatter. In the blink of an eye, the colorful light fragments were swallowed up by the vortex. Tianxing and the other two's attacks were all neutralized by martial god Tianju. He laughed confidently and said, is this all you have? You are so weak. Let me show you my stellar transposition technique. As he spoke, he formed a seal to activate the gold and silver vortex. It released 3 golden red pillars of fire toward Tianxing and the other two. Chapter 24:10. 7 months ago, Tianxing had seen martial god Tianju's star shift technique. Now, martial god Tianju's power had become more profound, and his secret technique had become more exquisite. Seeing the 3 fire pillars coming down, the 3 of them looked serious, and their eyes were filled with fear. Such a destructive attack could only be dodged and neutralized. They could not take it head-on. Swoosh! Tianxing used the armillary heaven secret technique without hesitation and merged with heaven and earth within 2,000 miles. His figure flashed, and he disappeared from sight. Yin Yao was protected by the divine armor, so her life was not in danger. She waved the shadowless dual swords to block. As for Jiku, she hurriedly took out the heavenly star chain. She used the power of the heavenly star chain to form a starlight shield to protect herself. Bam, bam, bam. In the next moment, 3 fire pillars came down with earth-shattering sounds. 2 fire pillars hit Yin Yao and Jiku, while the other fire pillar hit the ground. Yin Yao was blasted away. Her entire body was wrapped in flames as she smashed into the ground. Fortunately, the divine armor blocked the power of the fire pillars. She was only lightly injured. Jiku's starlight shield was shattered. She was sent flying and landed 30 miles away. However, the heavenly star chain blocked the power of the fire pillars. She was not injured. As for Tianxing, a deep pit of a few hundred miles was blasted out of the ground. The ground was filled with cracks. Dozens of mountain peaks had collapsed, and large tracts of forests and mountain ranges had been reduced to ruins. Ji Tianqing had merged with the heaven and earth. Now that the heaven and earth had been destroyed to such an extent, he was naturally injured. However, he endured his injuries and took advantage of martial god Tian Ju's laughter to silently appear behind him. He used all his strength to activate the god-slaying flying knife and hit martial god Tian Ju. He aimed at the back of martial god Tian Ju's head. Swish! The golden light flashed and disappeared in the night sky. Martial god Tian Ju sensed the danger and the murderous intent. His laughter stopped abruptly. He didn't have time to turn around. He instantly lowered his head and bent his waist, forming a golden divine power shield. But what he did not expect was that the god-slaying flying dagger was controlled by Ji Tianqing's consciousness and actually changed direction midway. Boom! With a muffled explosion, the god-slaying flying dagger pierced through martial god Tian Ju's protective divine power and stabbed into his back. No matter how tough his divine body was, he couldn't block the god-slaying flying dagger's attack. Pooh! The god-slaying flying knife instantly pierced through his divine body and flew out from his abdomen, leaving behind a bloody hole the size of a fist. Golden divine blood immediately spurted out and scattered across the night sky. Incomparable pain entered martial god Tian Ju's mind, causing his body to stiffen. He could not help but cry out in agony. He immediately bent down and reached out to cover the bloody hole in his abdomen. His face twisted as he cursed. Ji Tianqing, you despicable beast. You're Kenshin. How dare you use hidden weapons? How despicable. His voice was as deep as thunder, and his tone was filled with hatred. He was so angry that he almost went berserk. 20 miles away, Ji Tianqing stood in the night sky, covered in blood. He looked at martial god Tian Ju coldly and said with a cold smile, I'm Ji Tianqing, not a Kenshin. So, to kill you, I'll do anything. Martial god Tian Ju became even more furious. He pointed at him and roared hysterically, You shameless bastard, I'll tear you into pieces. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully. Not to mention tonight. Even if it's your next life, you won't have the chance. Then, he held the Burial of Heaven's sword and attacked martial god Tian Ju again. Yin Yao and Ji Ku also made a comeback. They swung their swords and performed their secret techniques. The three of them surrounded martial god Tian Ju and attacked him with all their might. Martial god Tian Ju was severely injured and his aura weakened. He did not dare to underestimate his opponent and could only defend himself. The two of them fought fiercely in the sky. Their figures flickered continuously. Unknowingly, the two of them had exchanged dozens of blows and the battlefield had shifted to the south. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku were sent flying again by martial god Tian Ju. Their injuries worsened. However, Ji Tianqing also took the chance to attack with the god-slaying spear and stab martial god Tian Ju's left leg. With a muffled sound, the god-slaying spear pierced through his thigh and golden blood spurted out. Martial god Tian Ju was sent flying for dozens of miles. His body was bent, and he roared in anger. His body was covered in blood. He swung his sword crazily and performed his secret techniques. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku were forced to retreat. Boom, boom, boom. The loud noise spread out and reached thousands of miles away. The dazzling radiance of Dharma power and divine power could be seen clearly from hundreds of thousands of miles away. The two of them fought desperately and wanted to kill each other. However, the four of them had exchanged more than 300 blows, and there was still no winner. Both of them were injured. Of course, martial god Tian Ju was still slightly better. In the battle, he held the initiative and had the upper hand. Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku did not dare to fight him head-on. After the two of them exchanged 400 blows, martial god Tian Ju was stabbed by the god-slaying flying dagger again. There was a bloody hole in his right shoulder. However, these injuries were more humiliating than painful for him. They did not affect him from continuing to fight. Yin Yao and Ji Ku had divine weapons to protect them. Their injuries were not too serious. However, they had used up too much of their Dharma power. They could not continue, and it was difficult to hurt martial god Tian Ju. Ji Tianxing's injuries were the most serious. Not only did he have dozens of wounds on his body, but his internal organs were also shattered. Golden divine blood soaked his white robe. His hair was disheveled, and he was sweating profusely. His face was also covered in blood. He had also used up more than half of his Dharma power. His aura had become violent and chaotic. If he continued to exchange a few hundred blows, even if he did not die, his body would be destroyed by martial god Tianju. However, he did not have any intention of retreating. Instead, he became more and more courageous. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that there was a hint of passion and anticipation in his eyes. That was because in this battle, where there was a great disparity in strength, he had used all his strength and constantly stimulated his potential. He had narrowly escaped death again and again. This caused his mind and Dharma power to be tense and pushed to the limit. He could clearly sense that the shackles of the martial god realm were loosening. The hope of breaking through to the divine realm was getting greater and greater. As expected, only a battle of life and death. The tempering of brushing shoulders with the god of death can stimulate unlimited potential. If I endure a few hundred more blows, I might be able to break through the shackles and reach the martial god realm on the spot. At that time, I can turn defeat into victory and kill Tianju. Ji Tianxing pursed his dry lips. These thoughts flashed through his mind. His eyes became even more determined. Sword of Burial of Heaven, he shouted in a low voice. He held the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands. He activated his Dharma power without caring about anything else and used his trump card. Instantly, the Sword of Burial of Heaven exploded with its strongest power. It released a pitch-black sword light that was thousands of feet long and slashed towards martial god Tianju's head. Chapter 24:11. This was the last move of the Burial of Heaven's 9 swords. It was also the most unfathomable and powerful sword move. As the sword radiance descended from the sky, the night sky collapsed and the spiritual chi in the area evaporated. Everything within a radius of 1,000 miles was destroyed. No matter how powerful martial god Tianju was, when he saw the huge black sword slashing down and sensed the terrifying nirvana aura, he was shocked. He could not believe that Ji Tianxing, who was only a martial sage, could unleash such power. As expected of Kenshin, at that moment, this was the only thought in his mind. Without hesitation, he waved his palms and shot out a gold and silver radiance that formed a huge vortex. Apparently, he wanted to make use of the stellar teleportation skill to neutralize Ji Tianxing's trump card. However, the outcome was beyond his expectations. Crack! The moment the gold and silver vortex was formed, it collapsed. After all, everything within a radius of 1,000 miles was destroyed. The area turned into a cold void, and a raging void windstorm immediately engulfed martial god Tianju. His expression changed immediately, and he hurriedly activated his protective divine power to resist the windstorm's attack. At the same time, the huge black sword slashed down and hit him. Kaboom! In the deafening explosion, martial god Tianju was engulfed by the black sword radiance. The golden protective light shield shattered into countless pieces on the spot. His sturdy divine body was also covered in cracks, and golden divine blood spurted out from his body. His left shoulder was cut off by the huge sword, and his entire left arm flew out and exploded into golden powder in the void. The wound on his shoulder extended down to his chest and to his abdomen. He was like a broken porcelain bowl that would shatter at the slightest touch. Martial god Tianju floated in the void, and his body trembled violently. He was furious and terrified. He stared at Ji Tianxing with bloodshot eyes and roared in a hoarse voice. How is this possible? No matter what, he cannot accept this outcome. He was a rank 6 martial god, and he had been severely injured by a martial sage and had lost an arm. There is nothing more ridiculous than this in the world. Only a divine artifact can hurt me. Martial god Tianju broke free from the spatial storm and stepped out of the dark void, returning to heaven and earth. He stared unblinkingly at the sword of burial of heaven and growled with a twisted face. Your sword? The sword of burial of heaven has already returned to being a divine artifact. This was the only answer that could explain why he was injured. Ji Tianxing stood in the night sky 100 miles away and looked at him coldly. He nodded and said, That's right. So you're going to die soon. In your dreams. Martial God Tian Ju roared crazily. I am immortal. As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body ignited with golden flames that soared into the sky as he charged towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing, you're the one who should die. The golden divine flame tore through the sky like a meteor and fiercely blasted toward Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was fearless. His hands formed a profound spell, and he took out the god-slaying flying dagger. Swoosh! Under his control, the 3-inch-long god-slaying flying dagger expanded to 1,000 feet long. Like a giant blade that could split the heavens and earth, it slashed toward the golden divine flame with an aura that could destroy everything. Ji Tianxing knew very well that martial god Tianju was so angry that he was on the verge of madness. He couldn't resist such a powerful charge at all, even if he used the Heaven Barrier sword. Only the god-slaying flying dagger, a mediocre divine artifact, was qualified to fight against it. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering explosion, the god-slaying flying dagger and the golden divine flame collided, causing golden light and sparks to cover the sky. At that moment, it was as if the golden sun was hanging high in the sky, illuminating thousands of miles. The entire area was covered by the golden light. It was so bright that people could not open their eyes. The destructive shockwave spread out in all directions, covering a radius of 3,000 miles. All the mountains, forests, and grasslands in the area were blasted into ruins. The earth trembled incessantly, and the sky was obscured by endless smoke and dust. Naturally, the outcome of the battle between Ji Tianxing and martial god Tianjue was decided. Martial god Tianju, who was already severely injured, was almost cut in half by the god-slaying flying dagger. Half of his face was gone, and his body was covered in wounds from which golden divine blood kept pouring out. His internal organs were all ruptured, and blood kept pouring out of his mouth and nose. Martial god Tianju's body was bent, and he panted in pain. His divine power was also rapidly weakening. He finally calmed down and suppressed the anger in his heart. Even though he was unwilling, he had to admit a fact. His injuries were too severe. If he continued to fight, he would be killed by Ji Tianxing before he could kill Ji Tianxing. Even if he could survive, his divine body would be destroyed. If his divine body was destroyed, his strength would definitely plummet, and he would need to rest for at least 1,000 years to recover. He could not afford to pay such a heavy price. Therefore, martial god Tianju endured the humiliation and decisively chose to escape. Whoosh! He used a spatial secret technique and tore open the golden sky. He escaped into an alternate space and teleported away. Moreover, this result was too humiliating. He did not even have the thought of leaving a few harsh words. In the blink of an eye, martial god Tianju disappeared from this world. At the same time, Ji Tianxing put away the god-slaying flying dagger, covered his chest with his hand, bent over, and coughed violently. Cough, cough! As he panted and coughed, golden divine blood poured out of the corner of his mouth and sprinkled on his white robe. His hair was disheveled, and his body was covered in dust and blood. He was in an extremely sorry state. His strength had also weakened, and his magic power was empty. Even though he saw martial god Tianju escape with his own eyes, he could not stop or chase after him. Moreover, he did not have time to heal himself. He quickly turned around and flew into the distance. The destructive shockwave just now sent Ji Ku and Yun Yao flying. Ji Ku was 100 miles to the south, lying in a deep pit covered in blood. Half of her body was covered in mud. If not for the protection of the heavenly star chain, her body would have been shattered. Ji Tianxing rescued her from the deep pit. After confirming that her life was not in danger, he gave her 2 healing pills and flew toward Yun Yao. Yun Yao was 100 miles to the west. She was crawling out of a gully. Although her hair was disheveled, her face was covered in blood, and her body was covered in mud. She looked very miserable. However, she had the protection of the divine armor. Her injuries were not too serious, and she could still fight. Ji Tianxing flew to her side and looked at her with concern. He asked about her injuries. Yao Yao, how are you? Can you still hold on? You didn't hurt the children, did you? Yin Yao quickly shook her head and comforted him. Don't worry, the children and I are fine. However, your injuries are the most serious. Don't waste time. Hurry up and heal. Ji Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Okay, let's leave this place as soon as possible and find a place to heal. As soon as his voice fell, a shocking blood-red light suddenly lit up in the night sky 100 miles away. A sinister, cold laugh was heard. Chapter 24:12. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Jiku had just gathered together and were about to leave. When they suddenly heard this sinister sneer, the three of them trembled as they revealed vigilant expressions. The three of them held their swords tightly and turned to look at the night sky 100 miles away. They saw a figure as huge as a mountain step out of the dazzling dark red light. It was a giant beast that looked like a bull demon. It was 3,000 feet tall and stood tall. It had 3 huge heads for thick arms and 6 pairs of blade-like black wings on its back. It was surrounded by a monstrous black aura with a bone-chilling aura of death. The moment it appeared, all the light within a radius of 10,000 miles was swallowed, and the entire area was sealed in ice. Ji Tianxing's eyes narrowed when he saw the giant demon's figure. His eyes were filled with shock. This is the ancestor fiend celestial? It has recovered to the godly realm? Yin Yao and Jiku froze. Their eyes were filled with shock and fear. They did not expect the ancestor fiend celestial to appear right after martial god Tian Ju escaped. Moreover, the ancestor fiend celestial had truly recovered to the martial god realm. Damn it, it's a fiend celestial from the ancient times. It's the grim reaper that had killed countless godly spirits. Although it has just recovered to the godly realm, its strength and techniques are even more terrifying than martial god Tianju's. Yin Yao and Jiku looked at each other and communicated through voice transmission. They both had the intention to retreat. The two of them looked at Ji Tianxing and advised him through voice transmission. Tianxing, the ancestor fiend celestial, clearly came prepared. We're already heavily injured. It's not good to fight it. Brother Tianxing, I know you must kill the ancestor fiend celestial, but you're already heavily injured. Let's avoid it and escape from this place first. Ji Tianxing stared coldly at the ancestor fiend celestial. He muttered in a low voice, Of course I know that. But can we escape? Yin Yao and Jiku frowned, and their hearts sank. At this moment, the ancestral devil god stepped through the air, bringing with him black gas and devil fire that covered the sky as he laughed loudly. Ji Tianxing, I didn't expect you to have reached the half-step divine realm. The speed at which you recover your strength is truly unimaginable. However, this god is still one step ahead of you and recovered to the deity realm before you. Therefore, you are destined to die with hatred and become a stepping stone for this god to return to the peak. Ji Tianxing didn't answer it. He asked in a cold tone, Martial god Tianju just left and you appeared right after. How can there be such a coincidence in the world? If I'm not wrong, you two have been colluding for a long time, right? Ancestral devil god was stunned for a moment before he grinned. Ji Tianxing, you are already a dead man, so why are you still asking? This god is the ancestor of the demon race, and martial god Tianju is the god of the human race. How can we be related? Furthermore, this god can't wait to kill him. So how can we be in collusion? Ji Tianxing revealed a mocking smile and said in a disdainful tone, Don't deny it. Back in the Tianxian continent, the demon emperor used the Taiyin soul severing ruler to fight with me. After I killed him, the Taiyin soul severing ruler flew away. 2 years ago, martial god Tianju subordinate Yi Lu Shui used the Taiyin soul severing ruler to assassinate me. This is the evidence of your collusion. The ancestral devil god frowned immediately, and the scarlet flames in his eyes flickered. He stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and suddenly sneered, his voice getting louder and louder. He. Ha ha ha. As expected of Kenshin, you actually guessed the truth from these little clues. Since his lie was exposed, the ancestral devil god didn't hide it anymore and admitted it. He nodded and sneered. That's right. Many years ago, Martial God Tianju was searching for information all over the world, looking for clues to ascend. Later, he found out about the ancient war of gods and the legends of this god. Therefore, he assisted the ancient demon emperor to nurture this god's remnant soul and help me to be reborn. In exchange, this god promised him that after I recovered to the godly state, I would help him leave this world. The ancestral devil god only used a few words to explain the contents of his deal with martial god Tianju. However, in reality, the cooperation and deal between the two sides took a very long time, and there were many twists and turns in the process. Ji Tianxing naturally understood that things were not as simple as what the ancestral devil god said. However, at this juncture, he was not in a mood to get to the bottom of it. Humph! Martial god Tianju, this despicable beast. As the leader of the human race, he actually colluded with the ancient demon emperor for his own selfish interests. He really doesn't deserve to be called a human. Ji Tianxing cursed angrily. The ancestral devil god sneered disdainfully. So what if you betrayed the human race and cooperated with this god? You have the secret of ascension and can leave this sealed world. How can you understand the despair of the other martial gods? Those martial gods finally crossed the peak of the martial way and reached the legendary godly state with great difficulty. They thought that they could live forever, but who knew that they could not escape the 10,000-year limit and would never have the hope of ascension? Do you know what kind of helplessness and torment that was? Ji Tianxing sneered and did not comment. The ancestral devil god continued. Which of the martial gods of the past did not try to find a way to ascend? In order to ascend, martial god Tianju did not hesitate to help this god revive. In order to unlock the world's seal, Luo Shui did not hesitate to spend a few hundred years to search for Yao Guang's inheritance. At this point, its gaze was as sharp as a sword as it looked at Yun Yao. It grinned and said, Yun Yao, do you think that Luo Shui wholeheartedly nurtured you because she is kind and benevolent? What a joke! Which god did not rise by stepping on mountains of corpses and seas of blood? How can I be a kind person? Luo Shui used you as a cauldron to revive Yao Guang and then take over your body. Her final goal was to turn herself into Yao Guang. Suddenly hearing this, Yun Yao's body shook. She subconsciously shook her head and instinctively retorted, Nonsense. The Divine Master is noble and virtuous. How can she be slandered by a despicable devil like you? No matter what you say, I will not believe a single word you say. You don't have to sow discord anymore. This is really a clumsy move. The ancestral devil god immediately raised his head and laughed. Ha ha! Looks like Luo Shui's disguise is very deep and has deceived everyone in the world. She has gained your trust. It's a pity that her plan is going to fail. You, Yao Guang's substitute, will be turned into ashes tonight. In my previous life, in order to suppress this god, Yao Guang's soul was scattered. In this life, this god will definitely not give her a chance to revive. I will kill her now. When he finished speaking, the ancestral devil god raised his 4 huge devil claws and unleashed a bloodlight that covered the sky and earth, smashing down on Yun Yao's head. The overflowing bloodlight covered 1,000 miles of the sky and sealed off the area. Chapter 24:13. At the critical moment, Yun Yao and Ji Ku unleashed their full strength, brandishing their swords to create a sky full of sword gleams. Bam! 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 However, the blood sea formed by the bloodlight still enveloped the 3 of them. Whoosh! 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 Huge waves rolled in the blood sea, creating a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The 3 of them were sent flying. Ji Tianxing raised his palms with a solemn expression. He formed a mysterious seal in front of him and used the demon suppression mystic art. 3 pure mystic qi, wind and thunder to suppress the demons. He roared furiously. His robe fluttered in the wind, and his body expanded to a height of 30 meters. His back emitted a dazzling golden light. At this moment, he was tall and mighty. His aura was sacred and domineering, as if a deity had descended. Boom! Crack! In the next moment, he pushed his palms forward, releasing golden divine flames that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, as well as dazzling 5-colored lightning. Boom! 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 The golden divine flames poured into the blood sea like floodwaters, evaporating countless skeletons and demon shadows. Dense raindrops of 5-color divine lightning fell on the blood sea one after another, blasting hundreds of holes in the blood sea. With Ji Tianxing as the center, the blood sea within a 100-mile radius was riddled with holes. Yin Yao and Ji Ku felt the pressure disappear. They quickly retreated to his side and joined forces with him to fight the enemy. After all, Ji Tianxing had more experience in dealing with the demon race. However, the ancestor Fiend Celestial waved his hand and shot out endless bloodlight, repairing the broken blood sea immediately. Swish! 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 The blood sea rose into the sky and immediately formed a 1,000-mile cage, sealing the 3 of them. The ancestor Fiend Celestial stood high in the sky and looked down at the 3 of them. He sneered with a hideous expression. Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, if this is all you have, it's time to end this. I'll end you now and take away Yao Guang's inheritance and Qin Shin's bloodline. This is the result of going against this god. To the ancestral Fiend Celestial, the person it hated the most was actually Goddess Yao Guang. In ancient times, it led 3,000 blood gods and billions of demon race citizens to slaughter the entire 5 elements world. The deities of various races were slaughtered by it, and countless of them died. The entire 5 elements world would fall under its demonic claws, and the living beings of all races would become the slaves of the devil race. Not only that, but the ancestral Fiend Celestial also wanted to conquer the outer realm and rule over the myriad worlds. The boundless and bright journey was right in front of him. However, Goddess Yao Guang appeared and led the gods in a counterattack. In the end, in order to kill it, Goddess Yao Guang did not hesitate to detonate her godhead and sacrifice her life. That was how the ancestral demon god was killed and the terrifying calamity was quelled. However, if Goddess Yao Guang were to know of this in the underworld, she would definitely die with everlasting regret. Who would have thought that the ancestral devil god had not truly disappeared? 30,000 years later, it actually made a comeback. This time, it would definitely not fail. It would definitely kill all those who stood in its way. Therefore, not only did it want to kill Ji Tianxing, it also wanted to get rid of Yin Yao. As for Ji Ku, it would just kill him along the way. It was not worth mentioning. Calamity of blood prison, soul burning and blood refining. The ancestral Fiend Celestial waved its 4 palms and struck out an ancient demonic Tao seal, releasing a divine ability. Immediately, the bloody light cage within a radius of 500 kilometers began to shrink. It exploded with a power that could suppress everything, ruthlessly suppressing Ji Tianxing and company. Not only that, but the bloody light also ignited with flames, burning their souls and refining their bloodlines. Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku immediately felt piercing pain all over their bodies, as if they were being dismembered. Ji Ku and Ji Tianxing's bodies were instantly covered in blood, and they let out painful groans. Yin Yao's golden divine armor also flashed with golden light and rippled with powerful divine power. Fortunately, the divine armor's defense was strong enough and could temporarily block the ancestral Fiend Celestial's divine ability. However, it was unknown how long the divine armor could block it. In this desperate situation, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate to use his trump card, activating the power of the heaven-mending pearl in his mind. Fire of light, destroy all evil. He formed hand seals with both hands, gritting his teeth as he shouted angrily. Sacred white light exploded from his body. Swoosh! The dense, sacred brilliance soared into the sky like a pillar of fire, dispersing the bloody flames within a radius of 50 kilometers. The suppression of the blood prison, the burning pain of the bloody flames, and the burning pain of the bloody flames also instantly dissipated. With the protection of the heaven-mending pearl, the pressure on the three of them was greatly reduced, and the pain was also greatly reduced. The ancestral fiend celestial immediately frowned and looked at Ji Tianxing with a gloomy gaze. He muttered softly, "What pure divine power of the origin! It can actually dispel my supreme demonic power? That's not right. He has not recovered to the godly realm. So how can he release divine power? He must have used a divine artifact." The ancestral fiend celestial tried a few times, activating the blood prison with all his might to suppress and refine Ji, Tianxing, and the others. However, the sacred white light within a radius of 50 kilometers formed a huge shield that was indestructible. When the endless bloody flames came into contact with the white light, they melted like snow. For a moment, the blood prison was actually unable to do anything to Ji, Tianxing, and the others. As expected, you have some skills. Looks like that divine artifact's grade is not low. However, do you think you can stop me just like that? The ancestral fiend celestial laughed sinisterly as he descended from the sky and attacked. World-exterminating demonic blade. Black Sun Calamity. He waved his 4 huge demonic claws and shot out dozens of pitch-black demonic blades that were hundreds of meters long, attacking Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ko. At the same time, he flapped his 6 pairs of blade-like black wings, creating 12 black hurricanes that attacked the 3 of them. Those pitch-black hurricanes were the Black Sun Calamity of the 3 disasters and 9 disasters. Its power was extremely terrifying. Ji Tianxing was busy controlling the heaven-mending orb to block the blood prison's attack. Seeing the ancestral fiend celestial coming for him, he could only try his best to activate the heaven-mending orb's power to strengthen the white light shield. Bam! 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 Although the sacred white light could restrain demonic abilities and power, shattering the bam. Bam! 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 Ji Tianxing was shaken. His face was as pale as paper as blood flowed out of his nose and mouth. Then 12 black sun hurricanes came crashing down, bombarding the white light shield. Bam! 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 The black sun hurricanes attacked more than 100 times before they were dispersed by the sacred white light and disappeared on the spot. However, the white light shield became even thinner. It was already riddled with holes and was on the verge of shattering. Ji Tianxing's aura became even weaker. The heaven-mending orb's power was also rapidly weakening. He was very clear that he could only hold on for another 15 minutes before the heaven-mending orb's power was exhausted. When that time came, he would not be able to block the blood prison's power and might be killed on the spot. With that thought, Ji Tianxing's expression became even more serious. He prayed in his heart, "There is great terror in life and death, but there is also great opportunity." Chapter 24:14. Ji Tianxing's injuries were severe, and he was very weak. However, he did not think of running away. He gritted his teeth and continued to fight the ancestor fiend celestial, neutralizing all kinds of divine abilities and secret techniques. He only wanted to get closer to death in the battle, so as to stimulate his potential and break through the shackles of the martial god realm. As time passed, the white light barrier became thinner and thinner. The heaven-mending pearl's power was also depleting, and it was gradually running out. However, Ji Tianxing still showed no signs of breaking through. The ancestor fiend celestial could also see that his power was weakening, and he was about to run out. Therefore, it was not anxious at all. It continued to use the blood prison's power to suppress Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Kuku. At the same time, it continued to release the power of disaster, bombarding the white light barrier. Source of deadly poison, Umbra Plague, Great Sun Fire. The power of disaster of different colors turned into a flood, an overwhelming light blade, and a torrent of fire bombarding the white light barrier. Bam! 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 Following the deafening explosion, the white light barrier trembled violently, and dense cracks appeared on it. Ji Tianxing's body also shook violently, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He looked even more haggard. Soon, 100 breaths' time passed. The ancestor fiend celestial struck out with 4 giant bloody palms, which descended from the sky and struck the white light barrier. Boom! Crack! Amidst the deafening explosion, the white light barrier collapsed on the spot, exploding into billions of blazing white fragments. An incomparably violent shockwave spread out in all directions, covering a radius of several thousand miles. Ji Tianxing was sent flying, and blood spurted out of his orifices as he fell 100 miles away, swallowed by the bloody waves. Ji Ku and Yun Yao were also sent flying, falling into the blood sea in a sorry state, falling into a muddle-headed state. Both of them were severely injured, and their minds were corroded by the demonic aura. Their vision was blurry. However, both of them relied on their strong willpower to charge out of the blood sea and work together to rescue Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's injuries were the most severe. He was lying unconscious in the sea of blood, and golden divine blood was gushing out from his body. The ancestral demon god stood at the peak of the blood prison, looking down at the 3 people floating in the blood sea, and laughed complacently. Ha ha ha! Kenshin Yaoguan, what do you have to fight this god? Now that all of you are at the end of the road and your lives are in my hands, what are your thoughts? You all claim to be the saviors of the world and are willing to be enemies with this god for the peace of the world. Now I'm going to tear you into pieces, grind your bones, and scatter your ashes. Can the people of the world save you? The ancestor Archfiend Celestial's voice was as loud as a bell, his tone filled with contempt and disdain. The 3 people in the blood sea ignored its words. Shua, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku flew to Ji Tianxing's side and wanted to help him up. However, Yin Yao suddenly realized that Ji Tianxing, who seemed to be unconscious, was enveloped in a layer of dense golden light. His body was moving, and the blood in his body was boiling, brewing an unparalleled divine aura. Seeing this change, Yun Yao was stunned for a moment, and then she revealed a look of surprise. Tianxing, you broke through at the last minute? You're about to break through to the godly realm? Ji Ku also came to a realization and revealed an expression of disbelief. She said excitedly, "That's great. Big brother Tianxing has obtained a fortuitous encounter between life and death, and is about to break through to the godly realm. Once he recovers to the godly realm, he will definitely be able to defeat the ancestor Archfiend Celestial." She had absolute and blind confidence in Ji Tianxing. No matter how strong the opponent was, she believed that Ji Tianxing would never be defeated. At this moment, the ancestor Archfiend Celestial also noticed that Ji Tianxing was acting strangely. He immediately frowned and shouted with a gloomy expression, "You want to break through at the last minute in front of this god? Wishful thinking." Just as he finished speaking, he waved his palm, creating a sky full of bloody light, which transformed into 4 sky-splitting giant blades, slashing towards Ji Tianxing. Yin Yao and Ji Ku saw that Ji Tianxing was still in the midst of his transformation, so they stepped forward and used their arts to block the attacks without any regard for their own safety. At this moment, the 2 of them had forgotten that they were severely injured, and they also disregarded their own lives. Crack! Crack! Amidst the loud sound, the sword beams that the 2 of them had unleashed were shattered into pieces by the bloody blades. In the next moment, the bloody blades were about to hit the 2 of them, and they would either die or be severely injured. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing, who seemed to be in a deep sleep, suddenly opened his eyes. Swoosh! Golden divine flames ignited all over his body, and he transformed into a giant golden sword. He soared into the sky from the sea of blood and met the 4 bloody blades head-on. Bam! 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 The giant golden sword and the bloody blades clashed, creating a loud sound that shook the heavens, and countless bloody shards splashed out. The blood prison, which had a radius of 1,000 miles, was also destroyed by the shockwave, creating a huge crater that was 300 miles wide. The ancestor fiend Celestial was hit by the backlash, and his body shook, and his expression became extremely painful. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing grabbed Yun Yao and Ji Ku and escaped from the blood prison. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing teleported 500 miles away and brought the two of them back to the night sky. Yun Yao and Ji Ku had escaped death, and they both looked relieved. The two of them did not bother to check their own injuries, and they both turned to look at Ji Tianxing, sizing him up with burning eyes. They saw him standing proudly in the night sky, his clothes and hair fluttering in the wind. Originally, he was severely injured, and he looked miserable. But now, he was full of fighting spirit, and there was not a single wound on his body, and his body was surrounded by a dense golden light. His body seemed to have become taller and stronger, and his aura was even more sacred and majestic, as if he was a god that had descended to the mortal world. Especially his pitch-black eyes, which were as deep as the void, containing endless vicissitudes and mysteries. Yin Yao and Ji Ku were excited and quickly asked about his situation. Tianxing, you broke through to the immortal state so quickly? That's impossible, right? Why aren't there any heaven and earth anomalies? If you didn't break through to the immortal state, how could your injuries have healed and your strength have returned to its peak? Facing their questions, Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, my foundation is still not enough, and I still can't break through to the immortal state. If I really reach the immortal state, there will definitely be heaven and earth anomalies. Yin Yao and Ji Ku were both stunned for a moment, revealing a look of deep doubt. You didn't break through to the immortal state? Then why do you look like a different person? Ji Tianxing explained again, my shackles have loosened, but I can't really break through. So, I can only use a secret technique to temporarily reach the immortal state and deal with the ancestor fiend Celestial. My state is called the false god state, and it can only last for a short period of time. Yin Yao and Ji Ku frowned at the same time, and a look of disappointment flashed in their eyes. I see. Big brother Tianxing, how long can the false god state last? Can you defeat the ancestor fiend Celestial? Ji Tianxing said in a serious tone, at most 15 minutes. I think I can fight it to a draw, but it will be difficult to defeat it. We can't stay here for long. Aku, bring Yao Yao back to the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda now. I can only deal with the ancestor fiend Celestial when you are safe. Chapter 24:15. Yin Yao and Ji Ku understood. With their strength, they could not threaten the ancestor fiend Celestial at all. If they continued to stay, not only would they not be able to help Ji Tianxing, but they would also become a burden to him and distract him. Therefore, the two of them nodded in agreement and reminded him with concern. Tianxing, if you could defeat the ancestor fiend Celestial, it will be fine. If you can't do it, don't force yourself. Big brother Tianxing, you must be careful. If the situation is not right, retreat immediately. Ji Tianxing nodded solemnly and comforted. Don't worry, I have the secret key to the divine pagoda. I can escape at any time. Ji did not waste any more time. He quickly used a secret technique and formed a flaming door in front of him. This flaming door was connected to the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. After all, Ji Ku had already refined and completely controlled the divine pagoda. No matter where he was, he could quickly return to the divine pagoda. Swoosh! The two of them stepped into the teleportation door side by side and disappeared with a flash of light. Seeing Yin Yao and Ji Ku leave, Ji Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief. He held the sword of burial of heaven and faced the ancestor fiend Celestial alone. The blood prison had already been destroyed, so the ancestor fiend Celestial simply kept it. It stood in the night sky hundreds of miles away. Its 6 pairs of eyes were burning with blood-red flames as it stared at Ji Tianxing. After observing for a while, it said, Haha, I thought that you had really made a breakthrough. I didn't expect you to only be in the false god realm. You have yet to condense a god's body and god's blood. How can you fight me? Ji Tianxing sneered and said calmly, back when Luo Shui attacked Baiming Palace, didn't you also use the false god state to protect Baiming Mountain? Since I can enter the false god realm, it means that I am not far from recovering to the god realm. The ancestor fiend celestial said confidently, I only used a little more than a year to break through to the god realm from the false god realm. You will need at least 2 years. However, you will be buried here tonight. You won't have the chance in this lifetime. He. You are too confident. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered. Who will live and who will die is still unknown. The ancestor demonic god sensed that Ji Tianxing seemed to be stalling for time, so he bellowed angrily, Ji Tianxing, don't even think of playing tricks in front of me. Die. As soon as it finished speaking, it waved its 4 large palms and formed a mysterious seal, releasing 9 different colored beams of light. 9 difficulties Devil Blade. Suddenly, the 9 different colored light beams converged into a light blade that was thousands of feet long and slashed at Ji Tianxing. Reality proved that the ancestral Fiend Celestial's guess was right. Ji Tianxing was indeed stalling for time. He had temporarily reached the semi-divinity realm, and he was in the midst of recovering from his injuries and accumulating his strength. Unfortunately, the ancestral Fiend Celestial had seen through it. He sighed in regret and could only cast his arts to block it. Only I am in heaven and earth, and all laws are indestructible. Ji Tianxing bellowed as he formed an ancient seal with both hands, his body burning with golden divine flames. When the 9 difficulties Devil Blade slashed at him, his figure disappeared into thin air and merged with heaven and earth. It was not like before, where he merged with heaven and earth. He had become the embodiment of heaven and earth, omnipresent and ever-changing. This was the true Armillary Heaven secret technique, a true divine ability. Even though he was only at the semi-divinity realm and had yet to condense a divine body and divine blood. But now that he had divine power, he could use true divine abilities and secret techniques. Kaboom! Amidst a deafening explosion, the 9 difficulties Devil Blade tore through the sky and struck the ground. A 1,000-mile-long ravine was formed on the ground, like a huge abyss. The ground trembled incessantly, and countless ravines were formed. 9 types of apocalyptic power spread out in all directions. In an instant, the mountains collapsed one after another. The rivers were also cut in half, and the sea of trees was completely destroyed into ruins. All living beings were killed by the destructive power, and everything within a 5,000-mile radius was turned into a black land of death. Even Ji Tianxing was secretly shocked by such a terrifying power. However, he had already used the power of heaven and earth to neutralize the power of the 9 difficulties Devil Blade, so he was not injured. Swish! When the Ancestor Fiend Celestial was searching for him, he appeared behind the Ancestor Fiend Celestial. Swish! He waved his left hand and threw out the god's slaying flying dagger, which turned into a 3-foot-long golden light and stabbed at the Ancestor Fiend Celestial's back. The Ancestor Fiend Celestial realized that something was wrong. Demonic fog surged out of his body and formed a black vortex to block the flying dagger. However, he had underestimated the power of the god's slaying flying dagger. Boom! The god's slaying flying dagger pierced through the black fog vortex and stabbed the Ancestor Fiend Celestial's back. There were black scales on his back and 12 blade-like black wings. The defense of his divine body was very strong. Even so, the god's slaying flying dagger still pierced through his divine body and flew out his chest. PFFF, a huge bloody hole was left in the Ancestor Fiend Celestial's chest. Dark purple demonic blood gushed out like spring water and sprinkled on the ground. The ruins were tainted by the demonic blood and were instantly corroded into black ashes. There were sizzling sounds and puffs of black gas were emitted. The god-slaying flying dagger drew an arc in the night sky and disappeared into the darkness, hiding in an alternate dimension. When Ji Tianxing found another opportunity, he would use it to launch another attack. The ancestor fiend celestial covered the bloody hole in his chest and stared at Ji Tianxing with a ferocious expression. He cursed in a deep voice, "Ji Tianxing, you despicable beast, how dare you sneak attack me?" Ji Tianxing sneered in disdain. "So what if I sneak attack you? I still want to kill you." As he said that, he formed hand seals and controlled the sword of burial of heaven to fly into the night sky. He used his ultimate sword Dao, great rotating sacred sword. Under his control, the sword of burial of heaven expanded violently and became a huge black sword that was 10,000 feet long. Swish, swish, swish. With a flash of black light, the pitch-black giant sword actually split into 9 identical giant swords. Slash! Ji Tianxing formed hand seals and pointed at the ancestor fiend celestial. Instantly, the 9 huge swords of burial of heaven exploded with sacred golden light and slashed at the ancestor fiend celestial from all directions. "It's just an illusion, a mere trick." The ancestor fiend celestial sneered in disdain. His 6 eyes burned with purple flames as he stared at the 9 huge swords, trying to see through them. In his mind, only one of the 9 huge swords was real. The rest were all illusions. As long as he blocked the real sword, he would be able to break Ji Tianxing's divine power. However, the result made him turn pale with fright and astonishment. The 9 huge black swords were all real. Even if he used the eye of the fiend celestial, he could not differentiate the real from the fake. Bam! 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 The ancestor fiend celestial was stunned for a moment before he was hit by a few huge swords. A series of muffled sounds rang out. Instantly, his body trembled violently. Demonic blood spurted out from his chest, back, and shoulders. The black scales were shattered and 6 bone-deep wounds appeared on his body. Blood flowed out continuously. The violent impact also pushed him back dozens of miles. Chapter 24:16. Bam! 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 Hundreds of black light blades clashed with the 9 burial of heaven swords, resulting in a deafening explosion. The black light blades immediately crumbled, turning into billions of fragments that scattered in the night sky. 7 of the 9 burial of heaven swords also shattered, turning into hundreds of fragments that fell from the sky. Seeing this, the ancestor fiend celestial sneered. Just as this god had expected, such a clumsy camouflage technique, it can't even withstand a single blow. However, as soon as it finished speaking, the hundreds of black fragments turned back into giant black swords with a swoosh. In the blink of an eye, more than 300 burial of heaven swords appeared in the night sky. Ji Tianxing expressionlessly formed hand seals and controlled the 300 swords to attack the ancestor fiend celestial. Swish, 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 swish. The swords formed a huge sword formation that filled the sky with sword radiance and divine flames, drowning the ancestor fiend celestial. The ancestor fiend celestial had no choice but to use all his strength, releasing monstrous blood radiance and black light to resist the sword formation. He used both his fists and legs to shatter the swords one after another. The 6 pairs of bladed black wings on his back also slashed out like sharp blades, shattering many of the swords. Ka, 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 boom, 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 boom. Crisp shattering sounds and deafening explosions constantly erupted in the night sky, spreading over thousands of miles. Even though the ancestor fiend celestial had immense strength and strong defense, he could shatter the pitch-black swords with his fists and legs. However, he discovered that after the sword was shattered, they immediately turned into even more swords. In the beginning, the sword formation was only 100 miles wide, formed by hundreds of swords. After fighting for a while, the sword formation expanded to 1,000 miles wide, formed by thousands of swords. The more the ancestor fiend celestial fought, the more fearful he became. When a number of swords reached 10,000, the power of the sword formation also reached its peak. The ancestor fiend celestial was forced into a fluster. He was injured all over and blood splattered everywhere. He roared in disbelief, "Damn bastard, What kind of lousy sword technique is this? How can it be so difficult to deal with? He was once an ancient great fiend celestial, comparable to a godly king, and had slaughtered countless godly spirits. Therefore, it was very proud and did not put ordinary martial gods in its eyes at all. Even the dragon's subduing general was an ant in its eyes. Even if Ji Tianxing was Qin Shin's reincarnation and was once the god king of the upper realm, he was still a junior in its eyes. Not to mention, Ji Tianxing was still at the semi-divinity realm. It had thought that killing Ji Tianxing would be a piece of cake. However, only now did it realize that Ji Tianxing was far more mysterious and difficult to deal with than it had expected. After a full 100 breaths of time, the ancestral fiend celestial was covered in wound from the sword formation, but he was still unable to destroy the sword formation. It was unable to restrain its anger. Finally, it could no longer hold back and used its strongest trump card, Apocalypse Calamity. Following its furious roar, the sky within 1,000 miles instantly collapsed. Just like a mirror, it was trampled to pieces. The dark night sky turned into a chaotic void. A violent and destructive power spread out in all directions, instantly shattering the entire sword formation. Uffed. Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of casting a spell, immediately trembled and spat out a mouthful of hot blood. He had never expected that the ancestral fiend celestial would still be able to unleash such a terrifying divine power after being killed so miserably by the sword formation. In an instant, it shattered everything within 1,000 miles, turning everything into nothingness. This kind of method was truly horrifying. After all, this was the ancestral fiend celestial's ultimate trump card. The Apocalypse Calamity was the first of the 3 calamities and the most powerful destructive force. In the ancient era, when the ancestral fiend celestial was fighting with Yao Guang and the 100 races, he had used the Apocalypse Calamity to directly destroy a world. Such a technique and scene was unimaginably powerful. Cough, cough. Ji Tianxing's body was bent as he coughed violently, blood flowing out of his mouth and nose. The sword formation was shattered, and he also suffered a backlash from his divine power. His internal organs and meridians were all shattered. The burial of heaven was also heavily injured. It let out a sorrowful cry and flew back from the night sky. Swoosh! The burial of heaven landed in front of Ji Tianxing and floated dully. The burial of heaven's voice rang in Ji Tianxing's mind. It was weak and hoarse. The ancestral fiend celestial's technique is too powerful. I'm already heavily injured, and my strength has decreased greatly. It is not advisable to continue fighting, or my life will be in danger. After saying that, the burial of heaven fell into silence. It was obvious that it had fallen into a deep sleep. Ji Tianxing lifted his sleeve to wipe away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He held the burial of heaven in his hand and raised his head to look ahead. He saw the ancestral fiend celestial, who was covered in wounds and blood, stepping out of the void and charging over at lightning speed. Ji Tianxing, your death is here. The ancestral fiend celestial roared and charged over with murderous intent. Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with anger and helplessness. He thought to himself, I am only in the false god state after all, and not the real martial god realm. I'm still unable to block its divine ability. In another 100 breaths of time, the false god state will end. I'm already unable to face it head-on, so there is no point in continuing to fight. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing made up his mind. A golden light flashed in his left hand, and the small golden pagoda appeared. He looked at the ancestral fiend celestial coldly and shouted, Tonight's battle is to test your strength. The ancient great fiend celestial is nothing more than this. When I recover to the god realm, the next time we meet, it will be your death. After saying that, the small pagoda in his left hand emitted a bright golden light and swallowed his body. Swoosh! Almost at the same time, the ancestral fiend celestial charged forward and slashed down with a few bloody blades. The bloody blades tore through the night sky and struck the ruins, creating a few 100-mile-long gullies. There was a loud explosion, However, Ji Tianxing had already escaped and was far away from this world. The ancestral fiend celestial was filled with indignation. His 6 eyes burned with bloody flames as he searched for traces and aura. Ji Tianxing, you coward, get out here for this god. He roared angrily as his body emitted a murderous aura that suppressed everything within 1,000 miles. However, Ji Tianxing was already hundreds of millions of miles away. After cursing a few times, the ancestral fiend celestial could only suppress his anger and turn to leave. Coward, don't let me catch you again. Before he left, he clenched his teeth and clenched his fists. Inside the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda, on the 5th level, on the demon god altar, swoosh, with a golden flash, Ji Tianxing appeared out of thin air. He stood on the altar with a pale face and held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. His long hair was draped over his shoulders. The golden divine light surrounding his body grew dimmer and dimmer, and soon it would dissipate. The divine power in his body was also weakening and would disappear in 100 breaths. A strong sense of weakness surged from his divine soul, making him feel extremely tired and sleepy. His eyes were a little blurry. Yin Yao and Ji Ku had already returned to the divine pagoda. However, the two of them had been waiting on the demon god altar, feeling anxious and worried. Seeing that Ji Tianxing had finally returned, the two of them hurriedly went up to him and supported him on both sides. Tianxing, how did you suffer such serious injuries? Big brother Tianxing, your injuries are very serious. Quickly go into seclusion to heal yourself. Chapter 24:17. Seeing that Yun Yao and Ji Ku were full of worry, Ji Tianxing waved his hand, indicating that they did not need to be nervous. He took out 2 pills from his spatial ring and swallowed them before circulating his energy to refine them. Not long after, the false god state ended. Ji Tianxing returned to normal, and his mind was much clearer. His injuries had also improved. Yin Yao and Ji Ku were relieved and quickly asked about the situation. Tianxing, how was the result of your fight with the ancestor fiend god? Big brother Tianxing, did you kill the ancestor fiend god? Ji Tianxing saw that their eyes were bright and full of anticipation, and he could not help but smile bitterly. I only entered the false god state temporarily, but the ancestor fiend god was a true deity. Moreover, it was an ancient great fiend god from 30,000 years ago. How could I kill it? Yin Yao and Ji Ku were stunned, and the light in their eyes gradually dimmed. However, the two of them thought about it and realized that it was indeed so. Ji Ku pursed her lips and asked, in that case, you fought to a draw with the ancestor fiend god? Ji Tianxing nodded and said, to be precise, both sides were injured. Its injuries seemed to be even more severe, but they were all superficial wounds. In comparison, my injuries were slightly more serious, and I will need a few years to recover. Yin Yao nodded slightly and said in a low voice, this result is also within our expectations. After all, you fought with martial god Tianju first, and you were already injured. You should quickly return to the 6th level and recuperate in seclusion. Ji Tianxing said regretfully, it's a pity that we were unable to restrain the Heaven Punisher army when we created chaos in the Luo Shui divine nation. Now that we have escaped back to the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda, we can't help at all. The Luo Shui divine nation situation is worrying. Ji Ku quickly comforted him. Big brother Tianxing, you have already done a lot. Don't blame yourself. In the face of a calamity, we can only do our best and leave the rest to fate. The outcome is not something we can control. Yin Yao also said solemnly, God Lord Luo River is unable to save the world by himself, and he is unable to turn the tide. His divine kingdom is probably about to fall. We have to make the best use of our time and strive to break through to the deity realm as soon as possible so that we can avenge the Luo Shui divine nation. Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement and said nothing more. Activating the origin divine formation, he stepped through the door of light. Shua! With a flash of brilliance, he entered the 6th level of the divine pagoda and appeared in the dark, distorted space. Yin Yao and Jiku followed closely behind. They returned to the 6th level and went into seclusion. Ji Tianxing sat down in the dark space-time and closed his eyes to recuperate. He thought to himself, "In the previous 2 battles, I was on the verge of death countless times. My potential and limits have been stimulated, and the shackles of the immortal state have been loosened. This time, I'm going to recuperate in seclusion. I want to take the opportunity to break through to the deity realm. No matter what secret technique I use, I have to break through the shackles in one go." After making up his mind, he first recuperated his injuries and repaired his shattered organs. Soon, 3 months passed. His internal injuries were completely healed, and his physical injuries were also 80% healed. Ji Tianxing took several sage pills to recuperate his divine soul. Time quickly passed. A year later, his divine soul was completely healed and returned to its peak state. Then he began to break through the shackles with all his might, striving to break through to the immortal state. Going from martial saint to martial god was not only an increase in strength, but also a transformation from human to a god. This was a transformation of form and advancement. It was extremely profound and related to the heavenly Tao and all things in the world. If he could successfully break through to the immortal state, his life form would transcend mortality and become an even more powerful life form. A god's body could transform into anything and everything in the world. He could summon wind and thunder with a breath, and he could topple mountains and overturn seas with a wave of his hand. These were divine powers. Only gods had the power and means to do so. It was impossible for a martial saint to do so, let alone control the power of heaven, earth, and stars. In my previous life, when I broke through to the martial god realm, I cultivated and advanced step by step. First, I condensed my magic power, resonated with heaven and earth, and transformed it into divine power. Then, I used the galaxy body tempering art to temper my body and transform it into a god's body. Finally, I refined my blood and fused it with all kinds of divine powers and secret techniques to transform it into divine blood. After these 3 steps, I finally broke through to the immortal state and became a martial god. Ji Tianxing pondered silently. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind as he considered how to break through. Now that I have mastered the power of stars and heaven and earth, I can immediately condense divine power. However, I have to make some changes and breakthroughs. I will also fuse the power of the heaven-mending pearl into it and refine it into a more powerful divine power that can naturally suppress demons. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing began to recuperate and fuse the power of heaven, earth, and stars. A few days later, he used the power of heaven, earth, and stars to condense a faint golden divine power. Then, he absorbed the power of the heaven-mending pearl and fused it with the divine power. This was a bold innovation and attempt, and it was extremely difficult. He was not sure if he could succeed. However, he was very clear that once he succeeded, he would become unique, and his divine power would also be very powerful. When he tried to fuse it for the first time, the 2 forces rejected each other and shook. Ji Tianxing's expression changed. He spat out a mouthful of blood and saw stars. However, he quickly suppressed his injuries and tried a second time. Bang! The faint golden divine power collided with the sacred white light and rippled again. Fortunately, the rejection was much smaller and the recoil was not that strong. Ji Tianxing was not injured. Great! This means that there is hope for the 2 divine powers to fuse. He was excited and secretly praised in his heart as he tried a 3rd time, although the 3rd fusion still ended in failure. However, the rejection of the 2 divine powers was getting smaller and smaller. He also learned from the experience of failure and constantly improved. He concentrated on condensing the divine power and forgot about the passage of time. Ji Tianxing was on the 6th floor of the divine pagoda, healing his injuries and cultivating in seclusion for 2 years. Only half a month had passed in the 5 elements world. In this half a month, the situation in the Luo Shui divine nation had worsened. The millions of heaven punishers were attacking the 5 southern nations with all their might. The 5 southern empires had a common enemy and were resisting with all their might. However, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. It was a one-sided slaughter. In a short 15 days, the Eastern Wave, Tianwu, and Moon Cauldron empires lost thousands of cities. Even though the 300,000 surviving divine guards desperately tried to stop the advance of the heaven punishers, their efforts were ineffective. Instead, the divine guards suffered heavy casualties and were on the verge of collapse. The billions of citizens of the southern nations were in an abyss of suffering. In their despair, they hoped that the Luo Shui divine lord could reverse the situation and expel the heaven punishers. However, the Luo Shui divine lord was being pursued by the dragon subduing general and did not have the chance to do anything. According to the current situation, the Eastern Wave, Moon Cauldron, and Tianwu empires would fall in at most half a month. The destruction of the Luo Shui divine nation was a foregone conclusion. Chapter 24:18. Unknowingly, another 12 days had passed. The army of the Heaven Punisher continued to advance southward, advancing step by step with irresistible force. 90% of the territories of the Eastern Wave and Tianwu empires had fallen. In order to protect the capital and preserve the empire's last dignity, the 3 sage emperors had died in battle. After the deaths of the 3 sage emperors, 90% of the empire's territory had been invaded, which was basically the same as being destroyed. Hundreds of millions of civilians had died in the flames of war, tragically massacred by the Heaven Punisher army. Hundreds of millions of civilians had lost their homes and fled to the 2 empires further south. They knew that the 2 empires in the south would not be able to last much longer and would soon be destroyed as well. However, no one was willing to sit and wait for death, and they still held on to a sliver of hope. A bad life was better than a good death, and even one more day was worth it. The situation in the divine kingdoms was worsening by the day, and they were on the verge of destruction. Only 2 of the 9 empires were left, and the Luo Shui divine kingdom only existed in name. That evening, the setting sun was as red as blood. Within the borders of the Scarlet Sun Empire, within the Scarlet Cloud mountain range that stretched for 50,000 kilometers. Whoosh! Suddenly, a dazzling icy blue light tore through the sky, illuminating an area of a few hundred kilometers. The tranquility of the world was broken. An icy blue figure stepped out of the crack in the sky. It was a beautiful woman with a cold and holy aura. She wore an icy blue dress, and her long hair draped over her shoulders. She wore a crown of ice crystals studded with gemstones. It was the Luo Shui martial god. Her brows were tightly knitted, and her expression was grave. There was a deep sense of fatigue between her brows. Her face was somewhat pale, and her aura was somewhat chaotic. It was obvious that she was injured. However, her expression was hurried, and she did not even look behind her as she teleported forward. She seemed to be hiding from something. Suddenly, a blood-red brilliance lit up in the sky 50 kilometers in front of her. Crack! The sky was torn apart by a blood-red blade, and a huge crack appeared. A monster as large as a mountain emerged from the crack. It was a pitch-black monster that was 30 meters tall. It was half human, half beast, and its body was covered in black dragon scales. 2 ferocious black dragons extended from its shoulders. It was the dragon subduing general. The dragon subduing general stood in the sky with a murderous aura as he coldly stared at Luo Shui and revealed a mocking sneer. Luo Shui, for 2 whole months, we've traveled hundreds of millions of kilometers, and we've practically traversed the entire Shenwu continent. So what if you run to the ends of the earth? In the end, it will still fall into my hands. There was no way to escape. Be a good boy and give yourself up. General Dragon's subduing's tone was filled with confidence and complacency. It was as if he was determined to win. Several months ago, he had exchanged blows with Luo Shui and fought to the death. At that time, Luo Shui was heavily injured and fled. After all, his strength was 3 levels higher than Luo Shui's, and there was no suspense in the outcome. It was the same today. The result would not change at all. Luo Shui looked at General Dragon subduing with a cold gaze and said in a cold tone, "There's an old saying in the human race. You can't do everything you want, but you can't say everything you want. You are so cruel and vicious, slaughtering 1 billion civilians and destroying the entire divine nation. Have you ever thought that one day you will suffer retribution?" General Dragon subduing was stunned for a moment before he said thoughtfully, "Although I've been learning the human race's language and writing to understand the history of this world, I've never heard of it before. However, I feel that your words are quite fresh and refreshing. However, in my opinion, in the face of absolute power, karma and retribution are all empty words. I've led the heaven crusading army and conquered countless worlds in the starry sky. I've destroyed countless worlds. If there was really such a thing as karma and retribution, I would have disappeared long ago. How could I have survived until today?" At this point, his lips curled into a contemptuous sneer as he said domineeringly, "I've never believed in ghosts and gods, because I am a god." While he was speaking, Luo Shui had secretly accumulated divine power and executed a teleportation secret technique. Swoosh! Her body emitted an icy blue brilliance as her figure flashed and was about to disappear, leaving this world. However, General Dragon subduing was already prepared. He had also secretly accumulated divine power to prevent her from escaping. After all, in the past 2 months, he had chased after Luo Shui twice, but Luo Shui had escaped each time. Dragon flames cover the sky. General Dragon subduing roared furiously as he waved his pitch-black claws, striking out blood-red flames that covered the sky and earth. Instantly, the blood-red flames that covered the sky enveloped a radius of 1,000 miles. The blood-red flames condensed into a huge cage, sealing this world. Luo Shui had just escaped into an alternate dimension and was about to escape this area. However, the blood-red flame cage released a terrifying suppressive force that forcefully pushed her back. Swoosh! A crack appeared in the sky as she flew out, covered in an icy blue brilliance, and fell into the blood-red flame cage. This world had already turned into a world of blood and fire. The dark sky, the majestic mountain range, and the lush forest had all disappeared. Only boundless blood-red flames were left around Luo Shui. They surged over like raging waves, corroding her protective divine power. The invisible sealing force was still suppressing her, causing her divine power to slow down and her battle prowess to weaken by 30%. This scene was just like the battle a few months ago. Luo Shui was once again in danger. She did not hesitate to draw the reverse water divine sword, slashing out an icy blue brilliance that filled the sky toward the blood-red flames around her. Bam! 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 Amidst deafening sounds, the sword light and the blood-red flames collided, sending out countless fragments of light. The violent impact caused the blood-red flames to churn violently. Luo Shui was also sent flying hundreds of miles away before being swallowed up by another wave. Kacha! Her icy blue shield instantly crumbled, and her divine power was quickly drained. The blood-red flames were about to touch her body and corrode it. At this critical moment, she formed a divine art with both hands and used a protective divine art. Weak water, ice heart technique. With a cold shout, an icy blue brilliance surged from her body and condensed into an oval-shaped ball of light. Ice blue water danced within the ball of light, releasing a power that could purify everything. Any blood-red flames that came into contact with the ball of light were purified and dispersed. However, within the 1,000-mile wide cage, the blood flames seemed to be boundless and endless. The power of the ball of light was constantly drained, but the blood-red flames were getting stronger and stronger. Even if Luo Shui resisted with all her might, she would not be able to hold on for long. Luo Shui, stop resisting. It's all futile. General Dragon, subduing, came over on a wave of blood-red flames, his voice as loud as a bell. He raised his fists and sent out 2 mountain-sized fish shadows toward Luo Shui. Luo Shui's expression was as cold as ice. She pursed her lips and did not say a word. She waved the reverse water divine sword, sending out more than 300 cold lights that formed a sword array to block the fish shadows. Boom, boom, boom. With a deafening explosion, the fish shadows and sword lights collapsed at the same time. Luo Shui's face turned paler, and her breathing became more chaotic. Chapter 24:19. Bam, bam, bam. General Dragon, subduing, continued to attack, using all sorts of divine powers. In just a short span of time, he had actually released more than 3,000 attacks. At the same time, he could also control the blood flame cage to suppress Luo Shui. Luo Shui was forced to retreat and was exhausted from defending. Her power was quickly depleting, and her injuries were getting worse. After a short span of time, her noble divine crown had been shattered, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her ice blue dress had also become tattered and covered in blood. Dozens of wounds had appeared on her body, and pale, golden divine blood kept seeping out. According to the current situation, her divine power would be exhausted in a quarter of an hour at most. By then, she would definitely fall into the hands of General Dragon subduing, and her life will be controlled by him. The situation was so critical that she could only contend with General Dragon subduing and try her best to find a chance to escape. Unfortunately, she had used the goddess's tear back then to escape the calamity. General Dragon subduing was already prepared and did not give her a chance to use the goddess's tear. Thus, she could only think of another way to create an opportunity. Swish, 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 swish. She took out 4 pitch-black swords from her interspatial ring and used the Imperial Kenshin technique to control the swords to attack General Dragon subduing. Sky-splitting strike. The 4 cold, pitch-black swords all transformed into giant swords that were thousands of feet long and released destructive power. General Dragon subduing had not taken her attack seriously and could easily resolve it. However, when he saw the appearance of the 4 swords, his pupils constricted and his eyes were filled with shock. This was because the 4 blades were extremely simple and crude. They weren't real divine weapons. They were parts of the heaven-punishing race's battleship that had been refined and polished into swords. Those are fragments of my race's divine ship? You actually dismantled my race's divine ship? You can even control it? General Dragon, subduing, instinctively shouted as he stared at Luo Shui. He knew very well that the divine ship of the heaven-punishing race was very special and was not an ordinary divine artifact. It contained a special power that only the heaven-punishing race could cultivate and use. And now, Luo Shui could also control it. There was only one thought in General Dragon subduing's mind. Could it be that she has already understood the source of my race's power and learned our cultivation method? This thought caused General Dragon subduing to be filled with wariness, and he felt a great sense of danger. He knew that the Luo River had assassinated many captains and seized many warships. If she deliberately studied them, she might be able to dig out the secrets of the Heaven Punishers from some of the captains. Just as the dragon subduing general was in a daze, for heaven-shattering sabers struck him. Bang, 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 bang. Amidst the deafening sound, the dragon subduing general's protective blood-red light was shattered by the long saber. Blood splattered everywhere. The terrifying impact sent him flying backward, crashing into the blood sea hundreds of miles away. 2 wounds appeared on General Dragon subduing's burly body. One wound was on his left shoulder, while the other wound was on his right abdomen. Blood gushed out of both wounds. The sharp pain coming from his wound made him sober up a lot, and he also put away his contempt. He hurriedly put away the chaotic thoughts in his head and focused on dealing with Luo Shui. He wanted to capture Luo Shui and interrogate her about the situation. However, when he returned to the peak of the blood-red flames and charged toward Luo Shui, he discovered that she had already disappeared. When he was sent flying by the long saber, Luo Shui had already used her ultimate technique and turned into billions of five-colored teardrops. Under her control, the four long sabers pierced through the blood-red flames and stabbed the blood-red light barrier together. Crack! A huge hole was pierced in the blood-red flame cage that covered the sky. Billions of five-colored teardrops immediately passed through the gap and escaped the dragon flame domain. Swish, swish, swish. The moment she returned to the world, Luo Shui felt that the pressure on her was greatly reduced. The endless rainbow-colored teardrops scattered all over the world for thousands of miles and disappeared in an instant. The next moment, General Dragon, subduing, chased after her. He saw the five-colored teardrops burrowing into the ground with his own eyes. He did not hesitate to use his ultimate technique to destroy this world. Raging Dragon slays the sky. With a furious roar, he activated the two black dragons on his shoulders and released a black dragon phantom that reached the sky. Boom, boom. The two black dragon phantoms that were hundreds of miles long slammed into the mountain range and the ground. Instantly, the mountain range that stretched for thousands of miles collapsed, and two huge abyss-like pits appeared on the ground. The ground within 5,000 miles turned into ruins, and the mountains and forests no longer existed. Millions of five-colored teardrops that had just burrowed in the ground were also destroyed. The loud noise shook the sky, and the ground within tens of thousands of miles trembled. In his anger, General Dragon Subduing had destroyed 5,000 miles with one move. Such power was simply terrifying. However, it was useless. The goddess tier that Luo Shui had transformed into had merged into the world. Unless General Dragon Subduing could destroy 10,000 miles with one move, he would not be able to kill Luo Shui on the spot. He had only destroyed 5,000 miles of land and destroyed a portion of the goddess tier. The remaining portion of the goddess tier had already fled this area and was nowhere to be found. General Dragon Subduing stood in the smoke-filled sky and looked at the two huge pits on the ground. He was so angry that his face was distorted. Damn you, bitch. You actually managed to escape from my hands once again. I swear that I will not let you escape for the third time. The next time I find you, it will be the time of your death. His thunderous roar reverberated in the sky for a long time. After a while, General Dragon Subduing's anger dissipated. Only then did he break open the sky and teleport away. 3 days later, at the easternmost part of the Luo Shui God Nation, on a nameless island in the endless sky ocean, Luo Shui, who was wearing an ice-blue dress, stood on a reef by the sea. She looked exhausted, and her face was haggard as she looked toward the west. Her eyes were dim and lifeless. At this moment, she looked weak and wretched, and she did not have the noble and majestic aura of the past, although she had successfully escaped General Dragon Subduing's attack. However, nearly half of the goddess tier that she had transformed into had been destroyed by General Dragon Subduing. As a result, she had been severely injured, and her strength had decreased greatly. She was in an extremely weak state. The Luo Shui God Nation will eventually perish, and no one will be able to save it. However, this failure is only temporary. I will eventually come back to take revenge. Luo Shui looked at the endless sky ocean with a determined gaze as she muttered to herself. Then, she took out 2 communication jade slips from her interspatial ring. After pondering for a moment, she drafted 2 orders and sent them out. Whoosh, whoosh. The 2 jade slips disappeared into the sky with an ice-blue glow. Luo Shui also turned and left. Her body merged into the blue endless sky ocean and quickly disappeared. 2 days later, the 2 remaining empires of the Luo Shui God Nation announced their surrender at the same time. The Heaven Punishing Army had just conquered the Eastern Wave Empire, the Moon Cauldron Empire, and the Tianwu Empire. They were resting within the borders of these 3 empires. The Heaven Punishing Army's elites were busy conquering various cities, seizing resources, and controlling territories. Originally, they had planned to rest for half a month before conquering the last 2 empires in one go. Who would have thought that the 2 empires would announce their surrender before they could even move south? This saved them a lot of trouble. The heaven-punishing army did not need to fight and had already conquered the entire Luo, Shui god nation.